It's 6:30. We'll start the meeting. This is the Development Control Committee meeting on the 18th of December. I'll start by telling you that we are not expecting a fire alarm, or a fire indeed, this evening. And therefore, if something sounds like a fire alarm, it may well be a fire alarm. And we'll act as if it were, and therefore you were then asked to, for those at the back, go through the exit there, and there's another exit here. If you have signed into the building, please don't run away. Please assemble down the edge of the Memorial Park, even though it's raining, because we do need to count heads and make sure that everyone has safely left the building. It's not happened so far. Please all think hard against fire alarms, and it won't happen this evening. Secondly, to note that the meeting is webcast. That means that if you sit in the front row of pews there, you might appear when people speak, and if you come to the table to speak, you will definitely be on the webcast for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren in future times to be able to watch how well you performed. And those who disagree with you can watch it and hiss and boo while you're speaking, but you won't be able to hear them. Secondly, to receive apologies for absence. I don't have any apologies for absence. Resignations and replacements, Paul?
For one night only, I will be Councillor David Eyre.
There's quite a lot of these nights, aren't there? Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chair. My son and his wife lives in Rookstown. They've been there since Phase 1 was built 15 years ago. I don't think it affects me, but if anyone objects to it, I can retire.
I'm sure what that chuckle means, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that counts as any sort of pecuniary interest or practical interest in the matter. There are no urgent items or announcements. I need to confirm the minutes, not of, as it says on the agenda, 30th of October and 27th of November. Those of the 30th of October have already been confirmed by the committee, but I do need you to agree to confirm the minutes of the 27th of November. Has anyone got any points they'd like to raise on that? Have you got the clean copy of the minutes for me to sign? You're going, it's the yellow, right. I'm gonna hand them to the Deputy Chairman, because I don't think I was here. That's right. Right. And get him to sign them. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Don't think it matters too much. Who signs them? There are no referrals from other committees or from the Council or from the Cabinet. So we move on to the agenda proper, which is applications for Planning Commission. And I'll explain the process as we go along. And we're going to start with the application for outline planning consent for land of north of Park Pruitt. The process is, for those who may not have been to these meetings before, I will ask the first speaker to come forward and sit at the chair there, and then we'll ask the officers to present the proposal or their report on the proposal, and then I'll explain the speaking process as we go along. I have a note here that there'll be a representative from Rookstown Parish Council. If you'd like to come forward, please. And if you'd like to just sit there for the moment, and I'll ask the officer to present the report, please.
This application is an outline application with only access for consideration at this moment in time for 585 dwellings on land to the north of Park Pruitt. Members will note on the update sheet, obviously we'll remember viewing the site last Friday, and to note on the update sheet that since the production of the officer's report, a letter has been received from Rookstown Parish Council, which generally is in support of the application, but raises a few concerns in relation to the off-site highway improvements, obviously the details of which would be secured via the 106 legal agreement. There's a comment in there about conditions in relation to the restriction of the hours of construction and deliveries. That's also within and covered within the committee report. There's also a comment being raised in relation to the additional parking opposite Norrie Court, and that I can confirm that amended plans have been received to address that particular area, but the actual detailing of that parking provision would be secured under reserved matters application. So in summary, the site obviously is an allocated site and within the settlement policy boundary for Basingstoke, and it's considered to be a sustainable form of development and delivers housing in the short term and would contribute towards the council's 5-year housing land supply position. The application also secures 40% affordable housing provision and areas of green space. The points of access into the site are considered to be acceptable, and the proposal would not generate inappropriate amounts of traffic onto the highway network. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the completion of the 1 of 6 agreement.
Just to confirm for those who may not be familiar with any of these processes, this is allocated land, and this is an application for outline consent, and there's a whole string of matters that won't be dealt with this evening. Assuming it's approved for its outline consent, it will come back for the details. And the other thing which I wanted to mention, because we had an example of it earlier in the week, is when the applicant comes back to the officers for what they call pre-application engagements, we're now encouraging members who have got an interest in the application to seek, with the agreement of the applicant, to have a pre-application panel, I think we call it. Is that what we call it? At which some of those matters can be discussed more informally, because when they get to committee there's a lot of difficulty in making changes. It either has to go through as it is or not go through as it is, and we're trying to have more interaction with members before that process. So I do encourage on sites of this size and anything sensitive that members will ask. It doesn't happen automatically, and the applicant has to agree, but we find most applicants are very keen to do it and find it very useful. So I'm sorry to keep you sitting there all that long time. It's now over to you, so you have 4 minutes.
Good evening, my name is Colin Statham, I'm Chairman of Ruxdown Parish Council. Having discussed the above application at its July meeting and at subsequent meetings with representatives of the developers, Ruxdown Parish Council submitted a response to the planning officer confirming we had no objection to the application to build 585 houses on the old golf course site, now referred to as the Northern Farmland. Indeed, we wholeheartedly support this application, which we are gratified to see has been recommended for approval. We have met representatives of the developer, David Wilson Homes, on a number of occasions over the past 2 years, and the application which has been submitted reflects and incorporates all the points raised by Ruxdown Parish Council at these meetings. However, we are concerned that our original letter dated 28th of September was not included in the original bundle circulated to members of the committee, but is now with yourselves. We're concerned that the points we raised, and in some cases asked, that they may be concluded as conditions of the planning approval. This includes the installation of new traffic signals at the junction of Park Pruitt Road with the A340 must be completed prior to commencement of site work. Ruxdown Parish Council wishes to see the prior installation of the above traffic lights as a planning condition. This is also under discussion as part of the improvement to traffic management system with Hampshire County Council, with the issues of rat running that we have on the estate at this current moment in time. Ruxdown Parish Council wishes to ensure that conditions are included which specify the control of the timing of working hours and of deliveries to the site. Also like to see a condition at these works to include improvement of the A339 Roman Road Ruxdown Avenue roundabout, which has significant traffic problems now, partly caused by the rat running that we have on the estate. We'd like to see some additional parking opposite Norrie Court, even if that entails the removal of some trees, unless a no-dig solution can be devised. The issue is that due to poor historic design in that area, that corner of what is known in the development idea as Ruxdown Gate has major issues with access for buses and the delivery vehicles to the shops in that area, with vehicles across the road and that sort of thing. And we have had new discussions with the developers on that, and as mentioned, that is actually included as part of a potential amendment to the plan. Again, we've worked with them to draw that together with the discussions with the residents. Particular concern to us is the fact that it is noted Section 106 application was to be signed before outline approval will be granted. Ruxdown Parish Council stated that we wish to be involved in Section 106 discussions from the very start, and this has not happened. This should be in line with the Borough Council procedures, and once again we have not been consulted on Section 106 monies for this plan. Whilst we wholeheartedly support the recommendation that this application be approved, we request that consideration be given to the inclusion in the draft Section 106 of the conditions that we've actually requested. Thank you for your time.
Well, and thank you for keeping so well within your 4 minutes. If you stay there for a moment, we'll see if members would like to ask you any questions. Members? Paul?
Thanks, Chair. On page 27 of the report we have in front of us, there are a number of comments to do with open space. And one of the things I just wanted to get clear in my head from the parish's point of view and then from the developer's point of view was, do you consider Ruxdown Park and the land to the west of the site to be appropriately enough open space for this site to consume its own spoke, so to speak, to facilitate the number of units being developed? And secondly, the playing fields that are spoken about. Again, obviously you have the large space to the south of where this site is being proposed, but actually here we're talking about the Everest Academy and playing fields across the main A340. And again, I would appreciate your view as the parish on what you feel about this.
Basically, what we've been able to work with the developers on is Ruxdown Park is a good area of space. But we also have an area on the Kingsclear side of the road, which is a part of land currently owned by HCA, which is on a nominal rent to Ruxdown Parish Council, which has football goalposts and that sort of thing in that facility. We would like to see an improvement of that facility to bring so that all of the focus on the space isn't all to one side of the site, and that is part of the discussions we have actually had with David Wilson Homes as well, to draw up in the detailed planning behind that. One of the things that wasn't on the original plans that they've been able to fit in is allotment space. There is a demand and a number of people in the Ruxdown area who are on the Borough Council waiting list for allotments. They've been able to slot that in. Also, the spacing of the green areas across it is something we've worked with them on. There may be a couple of little tweaks here and there. One of the big problems we have had historically on Ruxdown is a lot of the small parks in Ruxdown are geared for up to 5 years old, and no age group beyond that. Here there's a good mix. Again, because we've been involved in the development process, we've been able to work with the developers to bring this sort of thing into the play. Also, the lines of the footpaths and that sort of thing, and together with the car parking, you will notice it, whilst I accept this is purely for outline planning permission, some of the detail we've worked behind it to do with car parking and that sort of thing is to make the number of, shall we say, small courtyard parking spaces which nobody ever uses has been put down as an absolute minimum. These are issues that we have historic on Ruxdown, which is causing us major issues. So we've taken a lot of that on board, as have the developers, and basically what we believe has come up with is something that is completely acceptable, and it's been acceptable to the parishioners of Ruxdown through numerous consultation processes that we've been through, both with all the stakeholders and also with members of the public.
Just to be clear, none of those matters are being discussed tonight. Just for clarification for anybody listening to the webcast, it's not usually the case that any third parties would be part of the negotiation of a Section 106 agreement, whether they're members of parish council or anybody. And we did have a meeting on this in another committee very recently, and it was strongly recommended in that committee, and I think will go forward and be more widely publicised, that parish councils should keep a shopping list of things that they would like to spend Section 106 money on, and make sure that their ward member and the borough council is aware of that shopping list and keep that maintained. because wherever the Section 106 money comes from, if it's outside, being spent outside the site concern, it is very important that parish councils have a fair shot at that, rather than it waiting for the fullness of time to somebody say, there's some money, would you like it spent? So I'm just putting that in for information, because it's something that's come up in debate very, very recently in the council. We'd like to improve that process, but it's not part of the discussion between the applicant and the developer what's spent in detail in the parish or anywhere else. It's the amount of money in those concerns. Are there any other questions? Yes, Marilyn.
Right, I'm lit up. Highways, we've got here under consultations, the Parish Council are concerned about the installation of new traffic signals at the junction. Can you tell me what you're hoping for?
We're not concerned about it. We want it. We actually, there has been a process gone through since last year with Hampshire County Council, the hospital, all the stakeholders, Taylor Wimpey, etc., concerning the rat running through the estate, and this was done with number plate tracking through the estate, etc., which proved that 50% of the traffic using Ruxdown does not originate or end up in Ruxdown. There is currently proposal with the Homes and Community Agencies and Taylor Wimpey to amend significantly the original planning application, which I think was 2008 or even 2005, to put in measures that actually stops that rat running through the estate. One of those measures is the development of the traffic lights at the A340 junction, and Hampshire County Council have literally just completed the design of that that meets their requirements, and that will be being submitted as a separate planning application to alter the original planning application done in 2005. And that is something that Mike is involved in as that part of that process, because with this development you're going to put even more vehicles onto the estate, and more vehicles coming off the A339, A340. So we are already in that process now.
David?
I just wanted to check. I don't know if you've had the advantage of looking at the update sheet that we've all got in front of us. It's on the table over there, but all of the points, I think, without exception, appear to have been responded to by officer comment. Subjectively, I'd say pretty well. I wondered if you'd seen them, because they all answer the points I think that you've raised this evening, and I think ought to put your mind at rest. Have you had a look at that sheet?
I haven't picked up that sheet this evening. This has been drawn up over the last week, because unfortunately I'm away a lot on business, so we drew this up in case I wasn't able to attend. So yes, I recognise that, and from what I've heard this evening, a lot of these points have been addressed. This really, to me, is a point of re-emphasising those points and our concerns, that as we move forward with this development, that these are taken into the detailed planning application as we drive forward. And certainly our plans are, with David Wilson Homes and HCA's agreement, is to hold very regular meetings as they start to build up the detailed plan for this estate. There have been far too many mistakes made historically on Ruxdown before there was a parish council, and we are having to live with those issues. Section 38 was never properly drawn up and agreed.
I'm sorry, we shouldn't go back into the history, if you wouldn't mind. Any further questions? Well, all I can say, sir, is it's very encouraging to us, certainly me. I can speak for other members, but I'm sure they would agree with me that we hear that a parish council has been so closely engaged in bringing forward a development, and has been in constant touch with officers to make sure that the thing is doing what it should do. And we look forward to hearing more from you when it comes forward to detailed matters. Thank you, sir. I have Mr. Gale to speak to us. Is there a Mr. Gale present? No? No? Mr. Glendenning and Mr. Muir for the applicants.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr Chairman and Councillors. My name is Andrew Muir and I represent Atkins, who are a consultancy firm. We have acted as agents for this application. I'm joined by Mark Glendinning from HCA, who are the landowners. We're both grateful for the opportunity to address you this evening. Your officers have prepared a very comprehensive analysis of the application and the issues associated with it. And for that reason, our submission is brief and focuses on a couple of key points. A significant application which will deliver a high quality urban environment in a sustainable location. The report that's before you acknowledges that the proposal has evolved over a considerable period of time and has resulted from a significant amount of effort on the part of the applicant, the landowner and your officers. You will see from your report that your colleague, Councillor Mrs Cherrett, is quoted as saying, "I'm pleased to say that the process to date has been measured, responsive and very mature." The application site is allocated in the development plan and will deliver a level of housing in accordance with the identified land supply requirements. A proportion of the proposed housing will be affordable, again to meet an identified need. As a consequence, the proposal is in accordance with the development plan and the National Planning Policy Framework. A comprehensive and thorough environmental impact assessment of the proposal has been carried out. This considered the potential impacts of the development in respect of the landscape, nature conservation and cultural heritage interests. Specific areas that the assessment examined included landscape character and scenic qualities of the area, the Park Pruitt Conservation Area, and protected species that occur on or adjacent to the site. The assessment has concluded that there would be no significant impact on these assets, and consultation with statutory consultees has endorsed that conclusion. As a consequence, there are no objections to the development from statutory consultees. Residual impacts identified during the assessment process can be mitigated by the imposition of conditions which are included in the comprehensive suite which your officers have recommended. The traffic impact assessment which supports the application has been the subject of considerable discussion with highway officers at both the county and district. The assessment concludes that the level of traffic which the development will generate can be accommodated within the highway network with appropriate mitigation at identified junctions. Again, these conclusions are endorsed by your officers and there are no objections to the proposal on highway grounds. In our opinion, this is a well-conceived proposal which accords with the requirements of the adopted plan.
You have 1 minute, sir.
As a consequence, your officers are recommending that the application be approved, and we would respectfully recommend that you accept the recommendation.
And Mr Chairman and Councillors, I just wanted to add my thanks, or to add thanks really, to the Chair of the Parish Council and the Ward Member, Councillor Sherritt, and lots of residents that have engaged with us over the last 2 years. In terms of what Colin's already said, there has been quite a number of changes over those 2 years, and all for the better, I would say, in terms of parking, open space provision, the addition of allotments, lots of little small ways which I appreciate you won't see tonight because it's coming down the tracks as far as the Reserve Matters application, but as a process to get to an outline, it's been very useful, very helpful, and I wanted to say thank you for that. And just to say we're available for questions.
Thank you. If you'd just like to press your big black button for a moment. Questions, members? Yes, Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. The officer who introduced the application this evening mentioned that it was going to deliver houses in the short term. Please define short term, as far as you're concerned.
The programme isn't finally fixed, of course, at the moment with David Wilson, but they're anticipating Reserve Matters in the summer, making a start, mobilising summer 14, and actually probably completing the first units in the spring of 2015. And then obviously the build-out rate will be subject to the market conditions at the time, but I think short term just means that it's imminent. Certainly the agreement we have with David Wilson is that they will implement the scheme as soon as it's consented. So the agency, HCA, wishes to see delivery of those homes as soon as possible, and that's part of our agreement with them.
Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, a follow-up from that. Are there any deadlines in terms of HCA funding that may affect the provision of the affordable housing in that?
There are fixed timetables in the contract with David Wilson, but there isn't anything that's sort of a contingent thing around funding. The affordable housing, as we now, our approach nationally is that the Section 106 obligations, the affordable housing provision, isn't grant funded. It will be hopefully part of a provider of one of your partner associations provision in Basingstoke, so it will be typical of what you get here, but the Section 106 units aren't directly grant funded.
I had a question which is going a little bit further down the track, rather like the question about funding affordable homes. I just wondered whether there was mention of parking several times, and we have a history of inadequate parking, and we've got some parts of the boroughs which are blighted with inadequate parking, including some modern developments. And we also have recently, it's been recently noticed, although some of us have been aware of it for a very long time, that we have been building dwellings of a rather small size, 2 bedrooms of this size opposed to that size. And I'm just wondering whether the number of dwellings and the density on the site is the number in here, which says up to this number, is a reflection of how things were when this land was allocated, or are you taking into account the way the world is moving, which might be for fewer dwellings and more space and more parking? And I mean, you're going to come back with that, obviously, in the detail level. I'm just trying to seek to understand whether you have anything in mind in those respects.
It's been mentioned tonight because it was a subject of a lot of debate with the stakeholders and with the parish council, because clearly the historic development that the NHS secured the master plan for the core and southern area of Park Pruitt has had lots of issues around parking and was designed at a different time. So, the parish are actually working with us to try and put extra spaces into that existing scheme. The northern area is much more aware of the way people actually live, I guess. It isn't trying to, design something that doesn't fit with the way people expect to live in terms of transport. I mean, the actual size of homes and the mix of homes was something that we responded to as far as your own brief was concerned. So the planners here devised a sort of development framework for the site with guidance on the mix of homes, and clearly your policies are that there is a significant number of smaller dwellings to meet the needs in the area. So the mix is, as far as we can find, appropriate for what's needed. For example, even some bungalows for affordable rent, which is not something you see in most Section 106 sites. So the housing mix, I think, will deliver what is required. But the parking, the approach taken has been, yes, that there is probably a significant number more parking than in the core and the southern area. And it is provided in curtilage, parking courts, parking squares, on street. That's a whole sort of mix which is within the design code, which was part of the submission, which we'll come back to next year, to try and make sure that it's considered by occupiers to be accessible and secure, because obviously, as Colin has said, some of the parking courts provided previously don't get used.
Thank you very much. What I had in mind, in fact, you alluded to it in a sense, is really to suggest that you might question, and we will certainly question, I think, the extent to which the guidance provided by officers against which that was set might not be the guidance that might be provided by the council now. And we're talking about developing in the future. We should be very careful not to fall into the trap, members think, following rules that are now dated and should be updated. And I just urge that you should seek with your clients to revisit that. We will certainly be urging officers to revisit it, I suspect. Thank you very much for your time. Councillor Cherritt's not here, I don't think. I'm asked to draw your attention to the fact that, that's it, thank you. I'm asked to draw your attention to the fact that this is not Councillor Leake's ward, as it suggests on the update. Councillor Cherritt's ward, and Councillor Cherritt's already written her views to us. I now turn to, and therefore, questions to officers, please. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. There are some things we talk about that line applications. I'm just going to take issue with something that's written in the report. And I assume that everything written in the report is open season. On page 35. So, hang on. Page 35. Oh, we got that. Page 27. No paragraph number, but it's under allotments. Allotments are a bit of a sore point in new development. It seems to me that these applications grudgingly acknowledge that there is a requirement in policy for the provision of allotments. I'm a little disturbed here that it itemizes that we're going to have off-site allotments. The point about these developments is that allotments, and in my own ward, it took us a long time, but we eventually got 37 plots. This is a development starting from scratch. Now, the allotments, according to the policy, should have been put inside the development. Who's going to use the allotments? The people in the development. There's a shortage of allotments in the borough. And I noticed we were going to get an update in the update paper from that particular paragraph. And I see nothing in the update paper. Please, could we have the update? And comment, please, about off-site provision of allotments. Because all you've got to do is find land elsewhere when it should be provided within the development itself.
Yes, obviously I apologise for the area not including within the update an item to address that particular issue, but officers have concluded with the developer that there would be, as well as an on-site provision, and off-site provision and contribution towards, as stated in the report, to improve existing allotment sites within the close vicinity of the site at Sycamore Way, Cedar Way, etc. Obviously, in terms of securing the 20, because it would equate to 20 plots within the site, but the allotment officer feels that given the nature of the application and the amount of housing proposed, that there is adequate, that the 10 on-site provision and 10 off-site provision is adequate and would comply with standard.
Back to that, because the one big problem with allotments, unless you provide an allotment of a certain size with adequate access, if you then overload it with additional plots, because you've got to shift it from one area to another, I would put it to you, or I would ask, has that study been done on these other sites? Because you have an access problem, people are going to have to drive to the off-sites from this particular development. It just compounds the felony, if you like, all around the borough. If you cited the allotments within this particular development, you've got less of a transport issue and less of a parking issue. It's happening all over, and it's just shoveling the problem to somebody else's patch. Why, you're talking about the housing, but why didn't you allocate, or why weren't the allotments put into the plan for this particular site? Is it because not so many houses?
Okay, I think with regards to the allotment provision, through the scoping process, the allotment officer has identified the rationale, if you like, behind the 10 on-site. Do take the point that Councillor Miller says about sort of overloading, if you like, other sites, but in terms of the scoping process, what the allotment officer has to satisfy themselves is that A, a contribution is necessary to sort of take the balance, if you like, and B, that there are reasonable prospects, that there are areas in which that can be spent. So in that process, he has effectively gone through and satisfied himself on that. The one thing I would say about the allotment provision is that That was part of the, if you like, the new interim standards that were adopted, and I appreciate that developments should respond positively to those, and I think this scheme on the whole does. The discussions that have gone on with the developers across a number of years, I mean, I think it's dating back probably 3 years and more, from meetings that I was involved in, have taken into account those changes in policy as far as they can, and the number of houses have come down significantly through that process. So I think there is a balance at that point as well in terms of the overall open space provision. I think the allocation of the site was based on 750 units. Admittedly, this site doesn't include all of the land in the allocation, so it was never going to provide 750, but it has nevertheless still come down quite significantly from where it was, just to try and balance up all of those issues. So I think, let's say, on balance, the overall mix of open space and the positional allotments is appropriate in this instance, but I do take the point that Councillor Miller raises.
I think the key point for the future, and I think the argument is that argument is coherent. We're all aware of the fact this was allocated a long time ago, and a lot of things have changed since, and everything can't be done according to what it would like to be in the future. But the message to the allotments officer is, if the standard says it generates a need for 20 plots, it generates a need for 20 plots, and I think one suspects that the off-site contribution for another 10 plots isn't for another 10 plots. It is, as it says, to improve existing sites, which probably won't generate 10 plots. It I think what we're getting at, for the record, is that the principle of the thing is that new sites shouldn't be the source of money to keep existing allotments going. They should be self-sustaining or not, as the case may be. And we all know that there are problems in some cases with that. So it's a bit of a fudge, isn't it, to take money from a new site to keep something else going, when in fact what it's meant to do is to produce allotments. Councillor Pound was next, then I've got, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question, page 26, to do with education. I was delighted to see that there is provision for a new primary school to be completed in 2015. I presume that primary school, though, was to cater for the number of pupils that exist within the Rooksdown development and nearby already. So the 106 agreement, is it due to enlarge the present school for 420, or are these children supposed to go somewhere else to be supported by 106 monies?
The land to the south-east of the application site, there's an original site which is for the 420 places, but there's also room to the east, northeast of that site, which would allow an expansion should the need be required in the future to accommodate any population increase.
Councillor Potter, and then Councillor Tomlin, then Councillor Tucker.
Councillor Van covered a point similar to that I was going to raise over education. That's gone. So just returning to the allotment issue, if I may. I mean, two things. I know this is outlined, but as I understand it, we can probably see the projected allotment site on the, what I call the sort of top right-hand side of the plan that's up on the screen there, can't we? But is that right? I don't know whether you could point that out. I know it's only provisional, but and the second point I make, I mean, we are advised, I think, that in terms of the 106 agreement, as with other things, the allotment contribution is still under consideration and discussion. Is that right, with the developer? I mean, taking the cue from Councillor Miller, presumably there is some flexibility and some further discussion that could improve that provision, having regard to the likely size of this development and likely numbers of people we project who would be needing allotments. Is that still open for that type of flexible discussion?
No, the applicants has agreed to contribute towards the 10 off-site provision, in addition to the 10 on-site provision.
Obviously I was too subtle for my own good, but really what I was suggesting was, in terms of the 10 on-site, which seems to me the more realistic aspect of this, dare I say, have we got scope to talk further under a 106 agreement about extending that provision? Is it possible to do that in the context of any agreement we may form?
I think we're looking at a clause to be inserted within the legal agreement in terms of the specification of the allotments and how it would function on the ground. Is that what you're referring to?
What he's referring to is, can we get the number up?
So, based on the standard size for the plot, on the 0.18 hectare plot, there's only room for 10. There's no room for improving or increasing that provision, no.
Councillor Tomblin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. The first one, just a little bit further comment on Councillor Bound's comments about the school. Did I hear that the county have got this in hand, or yes, there's just a provision? I mean, is it actually the conversations you're having, they're really geared, ready for this, or is it just they'll see what happens?
The school provision has been secured under the previous 106 attributed to the outline, and as far as I'm aware, county have gone out to consultation, so they're looking at the feasibility with an intention to be on site or develop the site by 2015. I think they're currently just out to stakeholders with a sort of a draft and rough proposal as to what the scheme will look like.
And that was to take this on board as well. Sorry, right. My second question was one about. I notice in here there are issues with the housing that would be located close to the A340 with regards to noise, and there were suggestions of a bundle or barrier. And the tree officer, I think page 23, says he feels a barrier would be preferable because of possible root damage to trees or whatever. So the question I've got is, what sort of visual impact do you think that would have? Have you got any examples in the borough of the sort of acoustic barrier that we might see along the A340, or what's behind those sort of barrier comments?
Well, obviously the detail of what the acoustic barrier will look like has not been put in before us for consideration, and then obviously there's the conditions 20 and 21 within the committee report to secure the submission of those details. Whether or not, I've only dealt with like acoustic buffalo type fence in the past, which is obviously a thicker density grade of material of a fence, but obviously we'd have to look, given the proximity of housing to where it's proposed to put the acoustic fence, we would have to look at obviously how that then integrates within the existing trees and the impact on the roots and the landscaping of that area.
This is exactly the sort of thing that we would expect if members asked for it to be discussed in detail at a pre-application panel, as we had on Monday. The same sort of debate in quite a lot of detail before the application comes in, which we encourage. Councillor Tucker, then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Just coming back to the highways, or the 340 and the junction. It looks like it works. Can I be assured? I'm Mrs. Chicken sucking eggs and all the rest of it. That the hospital and the ambulance people and things like that are completely happy with how it's been laid out, so that there's no delay if we've got people rushing down, because at the moment we have major problems at that junction. Hopefully these separated off bits, the widening of it, should help, but I just thought I'd like to ask to make sure that everybody's happy with it.
We have a highways officer in our midst who will be delighted to assure you on those matters.
Yes, the ambulance, it will be designed so that that there will be no delay to ambulances. The signals can be linked to the emergency call in the ambulance station, so anything like that will be coped in, and the geometry of the junction is clearly wide enough to take all the emergency vehicles.
Mr. Harvey.
Two quick questions on highways. and this probably will be for detailed, when the proposals come forward in relation to the Roman Road roundabout and the A339 junction, obviously the context will be Ruxdown looking south. One thing I'd like to make sure that officers are aware of is Wellington Terrace that comes out onto that roundabout from a Winkleberry perspective and the dangerous context that that is in. And I would really appreciate us taking that on board. If you're going to look at a solution for signalising that roundabout or doing something around with that roundabout, please look further south. I would genuinely like to see that written in somewhere, that we will deal with the issues of the traffic entering into and exiting from Wellington Terrace. And happy to pick that up offline, but I think in terms of this going forward, and my second question relates to the allotments. Obviously, in terms of off-site provision, we have designated allotment land in the borough that is currently not being used as allotments. Is there any way of securing through the legal agreement that we can encourage the reuse of that land, bring that forward, and, for example, the contribution that this development is creating can be used specifically to bring allotments back into use on the designated allotment land that we have? If they're going to make a financial contribution, it helps us as an authority to do that, and the link there I'd like to see made. I have a particular site in mind.
I was going to intervene to say that prima facie, Paul's suggestion is better than using land that's meant to provide allotments for provision of allotments where land is available, rather than improving existing allotments. I mean, in prima facie, and I can't see anything. I mean, it would be unfortunate if the conditions were written such that it's directed explicitly to a particular set of places, rather than leaving that as a slightly open question.
I think in terms of leaving it open, exactly, Chair, in terms of it being for improving existing, that's fine, but I don't think that's appropriate. We're looking at new, and if we have designated allotment land that can provide new allotments in the context of the overall volume, that should be the focus of attention for the 106.
I suppose it comes down to the issue of the spend, if you like, of the contribution as opposed to the collection. With committee's agreement, one thing we could look at is, if you like, just the actual specific wording that it, and this is really for the spend side, so it's not the applicant issue, it's the council issue, that the spend is in the sort of priority order, if you like, of new provision first and then improvements to existing second, if that new provision can't be provided. And as I say, that's more the council's end rather than the applicant's end.
No more questions to officers. Is there any debate, or shall I move it from the chair? People want to have debate? I move approval from the chair. Somebody second that? Thank you, David. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. If you see people up here bailing out as well, it's not lack of interest, it's just they've finished the bit they were here for. I have Penny Lawrenson. Are you here? If you'd like to come forward. If you just sit there for a moment, we'll ask officers to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you is for the erection of a solar farm and associated infrastructure, including the erection of solar panels, mounting frames, inverters, transformers, substations, communications building, a D&O substation, and CCTV cameras. The application was subject to a viewing, where members would have noted the existing boundary screening and copse planting afforded to the boundaries of the site. The council's landscape officer has raised no objection on visual impact grounds, only on the change in character to the field itself. The application will bring benefits in the production of renewable energy and would last for an approximate lifetime period of 25 to 30 years, at which point it will be decommissioned should it no longer effectively produce electricity. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Good evening. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Penelope Lawrenson and I'm speaking on behalf of Lightsource. Lightsource is a UK company focused on the generation of clean energy from solar. We currently have 70 solar farms in operation around the UK, providing the energy needs for over 100,000 households per year. However, there is still a fair way to go. It is well established that as a country we need to significantly reduce our reliance on fossil fuels for our energy, both for the sake of the environment and also to reduce our exposure to the volatility of the global fossil fuel markets. Nationally, solar has the highest approval rating amongst the public of the renewable energy alternatives. However, site selection is critical. The site before you is an appropriate site for a solar development. The site is not within any designated landscape, ecological or heritage areas, it's not high-grade agricultural land, and it is visually contained. As indicated by the Office's recommendation for approval, the proposal is considered to be in accordance with local and national planning policy. Statutory consultees have confirmed the proposal will not result in adverse traffic, heritage, flood risk or ecological impacts. The Case Officer's report provides a comprehensive assessment of the potential for adverse visual impacts, concluding that the existing vegetation screening the site, combined with the proposed planting plan, will avoid any significant visual impact. All existing vegetation will be retained and maintained by our locally based operations staff. Natural England and the RSPB have recognised the potential benefits that solar farms can offer for biodiversity enhancement. Over 60% of British wildlife is in decline, primarily due to agricultural intensification. The current proposal will boost biodiversity on site by providing new habitats of woodland, hedgerow and meadow, as well as installing bird boxes for owls. Lightsource held a community consultation event prior to submission. This was advertised in the paper and information packs were sent to all residents within 1.5 kilometres of the site. A number of attendees at that event noted that our proposal was preferable to others that were being investigated in the area. The suitability of this site for a solar farm is further demonstrated by the fact that there was only one public objection on this site. Solar farms are relatively new to the UK. They are well established in many other countries. Solar panels have been in commercial production for over 50 years and are a proven, reliable technology. The solar panels we use are warranted to last at least 25 years and expected to perform well beyond this. At the end of their operational life, all infrastructure will be removed from the site for reuse and recycling. Therefore, there will be no residual landscape or visual impact. In summary, the proposal, subject to the recommended conditions, is considered acceptable with regard to all material planning considerations. The positive contribution of the scheme to renewable energy targets and local sustainability is considered to outweigh any limited harm that may arise as a result of the
You
development.
have another minute.
I therefore respectfully request that this committee grants planning permission in line with the Officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Well within your time. Do members have any questions to the applicant's representative? Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Has any consideration been made, as has been in other parts of the world when these solar farms are erected, that you can use the area underneath the actual panels for either horticulture or for grazing of animals as a sort of dual role? So we don't take away 6.5 hectares of land out of the countryside, if you will. It can be used more productively if you action anything else.
Yes, we try and promote this on most of our sites. We have on a large number of our sites sheep grazing, we have chickens on some, geese on others. On sites where it's not suitable, we look to have biodiversity enhancement instead, so meadow planting or wildfowl planting. Where the landowner doesn't already have sheep grazing or geese or something like that, we don't promise it as part of the application, but for our operations and maintenance staff, they prefer to have sheep grazing because it's a lot easier than cutting the grass under the panels. So we are in the process of actually acquiring our own light source sheep to have at sites where the landowners themselves don't own sheep.
For this particular site, what are your plans?
For this particular site, this is one of the sites where the landowner doesn't currently have sheep, so at the moment it's not part of the proposal, but because it's permitted development on agricultural land, we don't need permission to graze sheep. So in the near future, once we've got the plans to have our own sheep grazing, that will be implemented at the site.
Councillor Potter and Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chairman. Hello. One of the objections, I think, from Sherburn St John Parish Council relates to noise pollution, indicating a development will create an unacceptable noise level to neighbouring properties. I mean, can you help me with that, and what comments do you have to make on that?
Sure thing. As I was saying, you know, solar farms are quite new to the UK, and so when people haven't been to them or experienced them, there is a concern that, like with wind farms, that you might get a noise impact. On solar farms, you don't have that. The solar panels themselves, which is the vast majority of the site, they're completely silent. They don't make any noise. The only sort of noise generating component is the cooling fans in the inverter cabinets. They're only operating when the inverters are hot, and that's only during the sort of peak generating time during the middle of the day. So there's only noise from the fans during the middle of the day. You walk about 20 metres away, you don't hear it. You're 100 metres away, you absolutely can't hear it. And the nearest house is about 500 metres from the site. So there won't be any noise impact, you know, outside of the site boundary.
Any other questions, members? Oh, you're back, are you? Right.
The materials that these solar panels are made of, things are developing all the time. Is it likely that during the time, that the 25 years, do you think that there's going to be sort of upgrades to these solar panels were the application to be granted?
That certainly wouldn't be the intention. The main cost in terms of a solar farm is the setup cost. It's about £1 million per megawatt, and the vast majority of that is the solar panels. The solar panels are warranted to last for at least 25 years. At the 25-year point, they should be working at 80% of the efficiency of when they're new installed. So they're still operating, working well. Our financial models are all based on that, of not replacing them. So no, there's no plans to replace them if new fancy technology comes out.
Councillor Tomlin, then Councillor Harvey.
Good evening. You mentioned your maintenance team. It's really of interest. They're quite shallow angle. How frequently do you have to keep them clean, on how you go about that?
We usually wash them with water twice a year, so normally rain keeps them fairly clean, but you do need to kind of wash them down. It's just water with a medium pressure hose. You bring a water cube in on the back of a truck and spray them down just to get bird muck or any build up. Mowing is usually 3 to 4 times a year. And that's, you know, you bring the mower in on the back of a tractor, and then they might have to do hand mowing for under the panels, which is why the operations and maintenance team is quite keen on the sheep.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the power generated from the site, would it be your company's intention to feed that back into the local network, for example, local communities that may be surrounding the site, or would you simply be feeding it back into the national grid?
At the moment, it's not technically possible to feed it into a specific community, so it feeds into the national grid, but because it feeds into the national grid at the closest point of connection on the nearest overhead line, that power is then used by the closest points of demand. So it will be used by the local community, but you can't plug it into the nearest 100 houses at the moment.
I was going to ask, there's always this controversy about the removal at the end of the life cycle of the technology, whether that would ever happen, you know, because nobody can say what the company's going to do in 25 years. There's somebody, there would be a requirement, but who knows whether it's viable to implement it. But it seems to me that if the thing is, if solar power is still in vogue in 25 years' time, presumably whoever owned and operated the business would be inclined to replace it if it's making a profit. Like, you know, a house has got, you give something a planning application for 25 years, you wouldn't necessarily knock it down, you might maintain it and replace with new.
We lease the land from the landowner, and that's usually a period of 30 years with a right to renew at the end of that. So that would be a discussion at that point. And if we were able to extend the lease, then you might then look at saying, okay, well, let's reinvest and put new panels in for another 30 years. I'm not sure whether you would need to then get a new planning permission for that. That might, yeah, so you might need to redo that. If it comes to the end of its life and it was at the end of the lease and we were needing to remove it, the removal in terms of the recycling and the resale value of the scrap metal and the usable parts is actually worth more than the man-hour cost to actually remove that stuff from the site. So even if light source disappeared, went bust, it would be more value to someone to actually come along, remove all the stuff and resell it than to leave it in the field.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Thank you very much. We don't have a parish council. Councillor Lee, please. Good evening, John. You've got 4 minutes.
Before I speak on that subject, could I just say that in principle I support the concept of traffic lights on the A340.
No, you can't.
I'm
sorry, you can't.
Well, I'm going to say that because
you're using your minute.
I just want to say it's actually in my ward when you get out onto the road, and I hope I will be consulted as well. Thank you. I've asked that this application be determined by the committee because the site is relatively isolated and may not have got the publicity it deserves. Whilst I understand the importance the government has placed on renewable energy, it would appear that there is now concern about the cost of production and the impact the subsidies are having on our energy bills. Indeed, I believe the efficiency of this form of production is still questioned. The government's practice guidance on renewable energy says that the need for it does not automatically override environmental protections, suggests that local topography is an important factor, and recognizes that the impact can be as great in predominantly flat landscapes as in hilly areas. It also says great care should be taken to ensure heritage assets are conserved and that protecting local amenity is an important consideration which should be given proper weight in planning decisions. Finally, for solar voltaic schemes, it advises that the factors which the local planning authorities need to consider include encouraging the effective use of previously developed land. As members will see from page 47 through to 56, the landscape officer objects to the application on the grounds of the impact on landscape character, and that objection has been maintained despite the submission of amended plans by the applicant. The case officer has overruled these objections because he claims the submitted landscape and visual impact appraisal considers the importance of the application site in landscape and notes that the application site is not within or adjacent to any designated area of landscape importance within the development plan, and the site has a relatively uniform topography and lacks any real landscape features of particular importance. Well, they may not be important to the applicant because once they've received approval and built out the scheme, they may never visit the area again. But we who live here will have to suffer the consequences for the next 25 years. Furthermore, as I have already said, the government guidance actually says that local topography is important and recognizes that the impact can be as great in predominantly flat areas as in hilly ones. I suggest, therefore, that the concerns of our own landscape officer should be given far greater weight. There are also suggestions that the existing hedges will provide adequate screening, but as members who attended the viewing will have seen, the hedges are thin with gaps such that vehicles travelling along the Aldermaston and Morgeston roads could be seen from within the site, and by definition those travelling along those roads would see the equipment on the site. A small amount of tree planting at the proposed entrance to the site is not going to change that impact, and it takes time for such screening to have an effect. Furthermore, I repeat the words of the conservation team. A notable element of caution is urged regarding the longevity and reliability of vegetative screening. The site has a very prominent position on the junction.
1 minute.
Yes, thank you. on the junction of the A340 and Morgeston Road. The A340 carries heavy traffic, and Morgeston Road is the chosen access to the Vine, one of our most cherished heritage assets, and visited by thousands every year. All those using these roads will have to suffer the eyesore of the proposed development in what is otherwise a wonderful landscape. The land use is currently arable, and whilst I'm sure some members will be pleased to hear that sheep might be able to graze under the equipment, I would like to paraphrase an old saying: man cannot live on lamb alone. We still need arable land to produce the bread. We should be encouraging greater use of brownfield sites, not destroying our wonderful landscape, and thus ensuring adequate food production. For all the above reasons, I ask you to refuse the application. Thank you. 3 seconds to spare.
Members, you got any questions for the ward member? Councillor Potter?
Just wanted to be clear, Councillor Leake, if I may, in terms of your classification, we are talking, are we, of moderate quality agricultural land falling somewhere between 1 and 5? This is grade 3, I think, is that right?
Grade 3 is the predominant land category over the country. There's very limited grade 1, and most of that's up in East Anglia and places like that. There is some grade 2 around, but the bulk of highly productive land is actually grade 3, so that this would be a significant loss in my view.
Thank you, John. Question to officers. Diane, and then Chris.
Thank you. The question of how long this solar farm will last was raised. Is the only condition that addresses that condition 13, which just says at such time as the solar farm is no longer used for the purpose, it shall be removed? Or is I haven't read through all the conditions. Is there a specific length of time for which we're giving planning permission?
That is the only condition. It doesn't prescribe a set period of time as to when it will be decommissioned, but as you say, the trigger is at the point in time it no longer produces electricity for a continuous period, but it does require a energy production report to be submitted at a 25-year period, and if it's still producing electricity efficiently for a period as set out in a plan to be submitted under that condition for a continuous period thereafter. So there is a mechanism to require the submission of a report which gives us an idea of the energy it's producing, but the actual time scale for the development to remain isn't set in the condition itself.
If that report is satisfactory, or if it's not satisfactory but it looks as if new solar panels should be installed, would the planning permission roll on to the new replacement solar panels?
Solar panels are development, and if you're either erecting new solar panels or replacing existing solar panels, you would need permission.
Just before we leave that point, I'll come back to Chris in a second. I mean, presumably the owner wouldn't need to have permission to go in and replace a defective panel. On what possible grounds could we make that a planning application requirement? Doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah, I think on that situation it'd come down to a matter of fact and degree. If it's replacing one panel in the number, if you like, that was there, like for like, I think you would take a view that that in itself wasn't development. If it was that the report submitted under the condition found that all of the panels needed to be replaced, i.e. the whole site gets cleared and new panels get put in, that would be development.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's two things. The first one, just building on Councillor Taylor's point, condition 13, this period of 6 months or more not producing electricity, just how are we going to be aware of that? How are we going to measure that? That's the first question.
So the estimated lifespan of these solar panels is, at the moment, industry standard is 25 to 30 years. So at the 25-year point in time, we require a submission of an energy report. So we'd be aware at that point in time the energy the development is producing. So at that point, if it's not producing electricity anymore, we can then require the decommissioning of the site and restoration of land.
The point is, as I understand it, there's a government subsidy which makes it attractive to actually produce this. If the government popped this subsidy and it went away, then the applicant, on a pure business and commercial decision, might sort of cease use of this. And that could then be for more than 6 months. But how would we know? What requirement have we got to be made aware that this is either producing electricity or not producing it? Because I can't see how we can really... I see what you're saying about 25 years and then asking for a report, but it's in the meantime, in this 6-month period, we just, at the moment, I don't see a mechanism of how we'd know.
Councillor, if I can help, it's effectively the second part of the of condition 13, which says the scheme of decommissioning and removal should be submitted to and approved in writing by the LPA prior to commencement of development. That would effectively require, or we could stipulate within that it requires more frequent review and submission of information other than just at the 25-year stage. So effectively that detail could be secured through that part.
Thank you. And the other one was just to help me. We don't read it, and I can understand we don't want every bit of paperwork. But the glint and glare study that was submitted, is there anything in there, or can we be satisfied that there will be no glare placed upon vehicles travelling north along the A30 as they come out of Sherburn St John, sort of down that? They're slightly elevated at that point. Has that been covered and to our satisfaction?
The local highway officers have looked at, as well as myself, looked at the glint and glare report, and in this instance, I mean, panels in themselves are designed to absorb the sun naturally, but they can obviously have a refraction of sunlight. In this particular site, because of the relatively level topography and the relative enclosure of the site through the existing hedgerows, copses, the panels would be quite contained. So in terms of the impacts of any glare or light refraction, that would only be harmful where obviously the panels are visible, but because of the relative enclosure, we and the local highway authority are satisfied that there wouldn't be any impact on vehicles travelling on Morgeston Road or the A340.
Sorry, could I just return to the question of how long this farm is going to be here? Because I've just got this feeling that this is like forever. It's going to be a solar farm unless we do something at this stage to review it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure when we granted planning permission for a solar farm in Ellisfield, there was a condition which said that after 25 years or when it was decommissioned, it would return to agricultural land. And then at that point, of course, they can reapply, and we may choose to say yes or no. But if it's if it retains this use, which is solar, then that's what the land is used for. Just as if I knock my house down, I've got to apply for planning permission to rebuild, but that land is designated for residential. So is there, am I correct in saying that we could say after 25 years it should return to agricultural land, and then we got a level playing field again? We might decide we love solar farms, or we might decide that they're useless.
There is a scheme which has received planning permission and has been built in Ellisfield. They actually had a very similar condition. So if the scheme wasn't producing electricity, then it would have to revert back to its agricultural use and appearance. It's very similar to the Ellisfield condition that was imposed. If members are concerned about this point and it's critical to their decision making, it wouldn't be unreasonable to impose a specific time period within a condition. It's just this was probably a more flexible approach, which if after 26 years it was still effectively producing electricity, then there might be some argument as to whether that condition is appropriate.
I'm sensitive to the point Diane's trying to raise, or is raising. My perception of this is that whatever happens after 25 years, if somebody wants to replace a whole stack of solar panels on the existing site, there would be a very strong presumption in continuing the use of the site. That's how one would expect it to play out. And I guess what members are really saying is, well, we shouldn't at this stage, 25 years before the event, not know anything about the future of landscape, the future of technology, the future of anything else. We shouldn't assume that we might not want to use that land for housing. We might not use it for chicken farm or anything else. And therefore members would be happier if the planning application had a time constraint at the end of which it lapses, such that there has to be an application if it's going to continue to be used for that purpose, as opposed to there being an underlying assumption. I mean, I suspect that if all conditions were the same, any such application would be almost certain to succeed. But there is a comfort factor that says you can't predict what the world's going to be like in 25 years, and this is in a sense, might be a transient technology. Nobody knows, because the technologies are changing so rapidly. I think that's really why members are after, if you like, some sort of closure on the period. Am I right? Yeah.
If I mean, I personally would like it to say revert back to agricultural, because then we can start again. We can have this discussion again. There might be a new owner of the land who actually wants to raise llamas or something. I don't know, but it'd be nice to feel that we could start from scratch again. And as you say, if it's highly successful, then we're quite likely to say yes.
Thank you, Chair. There's questions to officers. I'd like to make a suggestion to the officers. When you erect this kind of thing, I look at it in a system, from a systems point of view, because this wind farm is a system for the applicant, or part of... Pardon? Sorry. Oh, wind farm's on the brain. This solar farm is a system within, I forget how many, they've got 70 or 80 in the country. The company will be monitoring these solar farms on their production of how efficient they are. 2.8 megawatts is mentioned in the report. Rest assured, they'll keep an eye on them, because if they don't continue to be efficient, they'll be looking at some remedial action. I see no reason why in this condition that you get a report every 5 years from the applicant assuring the local planning authority that it is still remaining efficient, and you get a much earlier indication of when there may be, they might be looking ahead in the next 5 years for decommissioning. What you're doing then is having a rolling program. I didn't think it's very onerous. I would not imagine it to be very onerous on the applicant. And it can be a side of A4, just reassuring the local planning authority that it's still continuing. That, I think, would then give sight of what's happening during the 25-year period when the industry standards say that these things are active. It's a suggestion for the condition.
There may or may not be any planning grounds to regard that as being onerous or not onerous on the applicant. However, I take entirely Paul's point that the applicant will be billing somebody for this electricity, so there's no question at all that the applicant will have that information, and whether or not it is something that can be required in a planning context, it would be immensely useful to the council, as opposed to the LPA, to know what electricity is being generated in the borough area, because the government reports on these things and we've no idea where they get their information from. So much sunlight falls in the borough, but how much of it makes electricity? So it's something that perhaps, even if it cannot be imposed, whether it can or not, officers need to look at. Well, it's something that might well be negotiated with the applicant, that the council would appreciate getting a 5-yearly update on how successful this wonderful thing is, assuming it's approved. Councillor Bound?
Well, this is sort of, it sounds like a bit like debate now, or is it still questions? All I was going to say is that the applicant seems to suggest that the materials and so on with these solar panels are so valuable that the recycling of them is worth their while. If it wasn't generating electricity, presume they're not earning any money, they'd just remove it.
I'm sure that's the case. I'm just making the point that it'd be, in my view, it'd be interesting to the council and useful to the council to know, as well as what we're generating on our rooftops and so forth, that a certain amount of energy is being generated in the borough from renewable sources, as a matter of pride or dismay. Councillor Potter.
I mean, I can see what we're trying to get at, Chairman, and the officers will comment, my only hesitation, I think, really, I mean, we start with a change of use, obviously, and this is an economic proposition, you know, a business proposition. I can't think of any other planning approval that we would give where we would say to whoever we've given that approval to, tell us 5 years whether you're still viable or not, and whether you're likely to run out of business in X amount of time and come back with something else. I mean, it's an interesting proposition, but only one that we find interesting in this connection. We wouldn't impose it, I don't think, on any other business, would we? We wouldn't be able to, I don't think. I mean, if you want the company to volunteer this information, I guess that's one thing you're saying, they want to volunteer it, but I don't think we can impose it as such.
Well, our officers will investigate whether it can be imposed. I suspect Councillor Potter's, my view is he's right. I suspect it would be onerous to impose such a condition because you're giving planning consent. You're not asking to investigate his business, and the information might be commercial in confidence anyway. However, it's something that would be of interest to the council, I suspect. So it's something to put to the for the council to put to the applicant, assuming it's approved or approved on appeal, and the applicant says no, that's a bloody nuisance, or I'm not prepared to release such critical commercial information. Bad luck, mate. Any other questions? In which case, would you want to comment on any of that?
Thank you. It's just on the condition. I mean, I think it is an interesting one, but I think the fact that, if you like, the energy being produced is, or the benefits of that is clearly a material consideration and does weigh in favour of the application. I think in this instance there would be reasonable to have the condition amended slightly so that it, effectively referred to the review being on the sort of a minimum of a 5-year rolling part. It's just that doesn't mean they necessarily have to stop after 5 years. Just if it doesn't produce efficiently anymore, then potentially they would have to stop, or the isn't producing electricity for supply to the grid for continuous period of 6 months or more, it would have to cease. I think on the issue of the giving permission just for a 25-year period, I think that's slightly more difficult, because if it was still producing at that level, the decision this evening is effectively, is it acceptable or not in terms of what's being shown. So I think it's the safety net is, if you like, has the efficiency gone down so much, and there would be continuous review within this condition, not should we be ceasing it after 25 years as a matter of course. Certainly the condition could be reworded slightly so that the last sentence does refer to, rather than it saying the site should be restored to a condition set out in the scheme of decommissioning and removal, that could be expanded on to say including reverting back to its agricultural use if it got to that point, but it wouldn't necessarily happen automatically after 25 years.
I suspect, having heard that, that's probably right. Discussion, debate, motions? Councillor Bound?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really pick up on Mike's point there. I mean, I would have thought that after 25 years, the technology would have moved on such a lot that the efficiency of the site, as it's spoken about in the report, and what it will be in 25 years' time, will be completely different. That's a personal opinion. In terms of the site, I mean, I've been using that road very, very regularly of late, and have been taking a lot of account of the site. Coming from the Tadley direction, until you're almost at Morgeston Road, you can't see the field. Coming from the Basingstoke direction, you can certainly see a view into the field, but I would have thought that with the planning, with the planting suggestions that are in the report, that could be greatly mitigated. And I hesitate at this moment to move the officer approval, because I want to hear the rest of the debate. But I'm in favour.
I didn't expect that quite so quickly. I have to say, I don't think the view of it is only important from the 340. Morgeston Road itself is used a lot and is the main way into the Vine. And there's also a lot of people go for the recreation in the woods further along, to exercise their dogs. There aren't many places like that that are really attractive for people to go to. I mean, not just the house itself, but also the land around. And to me it seems a bit gross to have this massive, great big solar field, don't know what else you call it, very, very adjacent to where people go for to visit such a historic place, and also a nice place for recreation. It just worries me, I'm afraid. I'm not against solar things just per se, but I just don't think it's the right site.
Councillor Leeks.
I agree with the recommendation, Chairman.
Is anybody seconding that? That's a recommendation to approve. Councillor Bound. Any other speakers? It's been moved and seconded for approval, which doesn't require any debate on conditions because we've had that discussion with officers. Those in favour of approval? That's carried. Well, yes, if you wish. Fine. Is there anything to say about anything we've said?
Not really, but just to confirm, the recommendation is for approval subject to amendment to condition 13 in accordance with members' comments.
We move to item 3, 14 Hackwood Lane. We don't have Mr. Duncan, do we? I have Mr. Prabdale to speak, please, if you come forward. If you like, no, just sit there for the moment because we'll ask the officers to present their report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. The application before you is an application to vary landscape and visibility display conditions on an original application to redevelop the site. The application is retrospective and has been already implemented. No objections have been received by from the landscape team within the council or the highway officer. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
You have 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. I'm the owner and the resident of 14 Hackwood Lane, and I've been residing here with my family for the last 3 years. In the application presented, I have asked for approval of the variation of conditions 4 and 6 in relation to landscaping and the visibility displays, and in the plans presented, as you can see, we've replaced some of the wooden entrance at the front of the property with what we believe is an in-character curved wall, and we will be adding a sliding gate. It should be noted that the previous entrance, including the gate, was smaller and offered less visibility than that presented today, and that was actually noted by the Highways Commission. In October, I actually consulted both Basingstoke and Dean and the Highways Agency, where they came out to site. They did a measurement, they did a site inspection, and they came to a conclusion that the plans that are presented to you today were acceptable both from landscaping and road safety. Looking at the list of objections, I can confirm that the pave that has been installed has been carefully designed to slope away from Hackwood Lane and runs off back into the property into 2 newly installed drain lines and 2 newly installed private soakaways. In the recent wet weather, no runoff has been recorded backing into Hackwood Lane, and the drains appear to be doing their jobs well. Regarding the pillar lights, which is another objection, these have not been purchased, but they are from the same family of the low lumens, low energy lighting that is currently around the walls of our house. We also don't believe that this causes any light pollution, as the purpose of these lights are purely functional in nature for both my family and I to enter and exit our property safely. With regards to the main gate, we are currently in discussion with 2 suppliers. We aim to lodge the design as per condition 2 by early January. And lastly, with regards to condition 3, we would submit a soft landscaping scheme in accordance with the condition in January when we understand the costing of the trees and the shrubs better. I thank you for your time.
That was very, very nicely short. Thank you, sir. Questions to the applicant? Anyone? No? No? I just had a question as to why did you do it? Why didn't you do what had been approved of in the first place?
What was approved wasn't, well, I didn't do what was approved because all I did was I replaced a wooden fence and a wooden panel, which was a solid fence, with a wall. So I put back what was there. I also found that on the application, there was they claimed to be a variance of a hedge and a wooden fence across the front of my land. In fact, there was a hedge there, there was a fence there, except it was rotten, so I just replaced the entire thing. Because we just moved in 3 years ago and we refurbished our house.
No questions. Thank you very much, sir. Questions to officers? No. Anybody anything to say, David?
Sorry, Chair, I just want to be absolutely sure. I'm sorry, it's tautology in the sense that there's wording here, but obviously some concern was originally expressed, I think, about the sort of splay lines and the visibility lines. But I think I am reassured, but if it could just be said again, I mean, the highways officer is satisfied that there is no safety issue in regard to those visibility splays as now constructed as against what was originally suggested. They are the most practical and sensible that we can achieve there, I think, are they?
Yep, that's correct. I mean, the condition previously required displays that were greater, so they might have afforded more visibility, but the highway officer was satisfied what is proposed is acceptable, and as you say, they're satisfied on the basis it's both safe and the most realistic and appropriate for this context and this site.
No further questions, David? You?
I was just going to encourage you, Chairman, if I may, just to move to approval, quite frankly. I mean, this is my own position on it, and I see people nodding. I don't think there's a lot of debate, if I dare say that, required, really. I think it's straightforward.
I'm not seeking debate where none is required. So that's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? That's granted. Anything to say, Robert? Just to say it's approved.
The application has been approved.
On to application number 4, which is Church Street, Whitchurch, and I have Mr. Knight, I think, has arrived to speak. If you'd like to just sit there for a moment, and we'll ask officers to present their report.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application on land to the rear of number 4 Church Street in Whitchurch. It's a proposal to change the use of the land to residential, including the creation of a hard standing area to allow the parking of one vehicle. The proposal also includes the erection of a 1.83 metre high wall and double gates. The information submitted by the application is considered to be insufficient, and further information is required in relation to the level at the site, the parking area and the operation of the gates. And in addition, officers also require a tree survey. And this, in this instance, has led to the recommendation for refusal of planning permission due to the lack of that information to adequately assess the proposal and the impacts of the proposal against our policies. In terms of the update, there is just the viewing panel notes. There's no further update on this application.
Thank you. You have 4 minutes, sir.
My name is Michael Knight. I'm the applicant and resident of 4 Church Street. This is an application for a change of use from an area of open space to an area of residential garden. This follows our purchase of the land from Jefferson Housing in June of this year. The piece of land referred to is immediately behind our garden at 4 Church Street, Whitchurch. Following change of use, it is proposed to build a 6-foot, 1.83 metre high wall to border the garden on the south side, installing wooden gates to provide an area inside the garden for parking. It is intended to use the foundations and low brick walls already built on this line in the construction of the new brick wall. This will enable it to be built without further digging down and avoid any disturbance to tree roots. For there's an ash tree within the garden approximately 6 metres from the area proposed for parking. This tree is already bordered by a brick wall on all 4 sides. It is not intended to drop the level of the land to construct a concrete standing, purely to drop it to the level of the parking space for access of the car. Since taking possession of the land, we have applied for and been granted permission for crown lift and a 20% reduction of the tree. This work was undertaken in October 2013 at a cost of £550. We would like this tree to be part of the landscape of Whitchurch for many years to come. I would add that during the previous 5 years, no tree work was carried out on the tree, neither have we been asked at any time for a tree survey. A large section of the paved area will be removed, thus significantly adding to the drainage of the land. It is proposed to incorporate gates into the wall to allow one vehicle access to the garden for parking. In effect, this will only extend our parking space from the parking area for 5 cars, not 6 as indicated, owned and managed by Jeffson Housing. Our parking space is leased from Jeffson Housing as per the agreement with Basingstoke and Dean BC in 1989 and is permanently available to the occupiers and successors of 4 Church Street. There is a similar agreement for another parking space for 6 Church Street. There are currently no problems in entering or leaving vehicles parked in our parking spaces, nor will there be any problems once the vehicle is in the garden. Only the occupants of number 4 or authorised others will be able to use the parking spaces. There will be no displacement of other vehicles onto the public highway, quite the contrary, as it will allow one further vehicle to be taken off the public highway. I would add that numbers 2, 2A and 6 already have gates installed for parking within their gardens. The gates will be installed to ensure they do not interfere with other parking spaces, either within Longs Court or Church Street. In summary, I would argue that as there will be no digging down by using existing foundations, there will be no disturbance of tree roots, and by purely extending our current parking space into the garden, there will be no loss of parking spaces. However, this application is for change of use, to bring the piece of land into our garden subsequent to our purchase of it in June of this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Admirably succinct. Any questions for the applicant? David?
Hello, sir. Just absolute clarification on my part. Assuming you have 2 cars within the family, the intention would be to have 1 car parked within, on the inside of the gate that you create, I mean in what is now your garden area, and the other one would be on the hard standing outside. That would be the intention. And sorry, and supplementary to that, by definition, if you want to get the inside car out, sorry I haven't expressed that very well, then it will be down to you to move that temporarily. Is that the sort of proposal you have in mind?
That's correct. Obviously, as we do have 2 vehicles at the moment, one either occupies a position in a car park or on the public highway, and this will enable us to take both of them off the road. The road in question that leads into our parking space is purely the access road into Longs Court. It's not a through thoroughfare. It's just purely into Longs Court for parking purposes.
Any other questions to the applicant? No? Thank you very much, sir. You can withdraw if you would now.
Thank you.
Any questions to the officers? Anybody got anything to say? David?
I mean, it was all going so well, I was supporting everything up to date, but I mean in this case, I mean I did go on the site visit, it did appear to me that one of the reasons for refusal where it had not been demonstrated that the proposed development would not displace vehicles onto the adjacent public highway. I mean, I made the point, sorry, about the sort of double negative there, but it seems to me just the opposite is true, really, that in this way, if this is created, the occupant will be able to have both of her vehicles within, well, A, their curtilage, and B, this supplementary parking area. So it just seemed to me, putting it on the line, this is a better arrangement than what they've got currently. I hesitate with these words really, but it's not the most attractive of areas at the present time in terms of a mixture of things. If there is a wall created in the way that's being suggested, 1.83, about 6 foot high, it seems to me if that is done well, that's an improvement really in terms of the visual appearance of that area, and on that basis I would certainly support the application. And I'm happy to move it, Chair. Really.
Yeah. Anybody else who was on the site visit want to say anything? No? No? It's been moved for approval. Councillor Bound? Yes? Moved and seconded for approval. Those in... hold on. Reasons for approval? It's not going to affect anybody else?
Yeah, I'm not doing this very well, I know, but really I think it was just the opposite, really, to the reason for refusal here, where I think it in fact would improve the parking facility, would take a vehicle, improve the general provision of parking in that area and to the applicant himself. And certainly in regard to what we've heard in regard to the tree, I think, again, there is no evidence, as far as I can see, that this would actually inflict unacceptable harm on that tree.
I suspect that what we've got here, because looking at the drawings, it's pretty obscure, and it may be that officers haven't felt confident that they've been able to convince themselves that this wouldn't harm anybody else's parking capabilities. However, it's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? It's carried for approval. Report, please.
Chair, the application's been approved. We'd need to discuss and agree some conditions with you. The conditions we would suggest were materials for the surfacing of the parking area, condition requiring submission of tree protection plan for the tree, details of the boundary treatment, the sort of construction of the wall, how that would actually work, any relevant conditions that the highway officer would seek to impose, and a levels condition, and also a condition regarding the operation of the gate and how that would actually work.
Just a question, given that the applicant says that the tree is surrounded by wall, and he's not proposing to change the wall it's surrounded by, would the tree protection condition be satisfied by the applicant confirming that he's not planning to change the wall? Walls.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not clear what you do to a tree protection order if you're not going to do anything to the tree.
Yes, the plans that have been submitted don't actually show what the applicant has said, that it would be, new wall would be built on the existing wall. So assuming that the applicant does actually build the new wall, then yes, that would negate the need for the tree protection plan.
And the levels condition means what?
There's a distance of about that much between the existing 28 centimetres between the existing parking space and the proposed parking space. The plans that have been submitted don't actually show how a car would actually get across that level distance, and obviously we'd need the information to know, especially if there's no alterations to the wall.
Members happy with that? Yeah, thank you very much. We move on to item 5, Down Farm. Oh no, this is there's an extension, and I have Mr. Peter speak to us, and then I think the only other person we're going to hear from is the ward councillor, Councillor Raffel. If you'd like to just sit down for a moment, sir, while the officers present the report.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you is for the erection of a 2-storey extension and front porch following the demolition of existing extensions and outbuildings. The application was subject to viewing and is recommended for refusal on the basis that the depth and design of the extension would result in a development that would be out of keeping with the existing dwelling and the character of the area.
Right, gentlemen, you have 4 minutes, and you just press the big wide button.
Good evening. My name is Edward Peter. I'm the owner of the property and got Guy Everson, the architect. The house in question has been owned by the family since 1914, and the family has been fortunate enough to pass it through a number of generations. My wife, 2 young children, and I are looking to spend many years in the house. We are looking to upgrade, modernise, and improve the accommodation ready for our young family. The house is in desperate need of modernisation, having not seen any work for 30 years plus. We plan on a much needed upgrade of the electrical and plumbing services, improve the house's insulation, and replace existing unsightly flat roof wooden structures with an extension that is more sympathetic to the original house. The current wooden extension is made up of 2 separate buildings, one with a flat roof and one with a pitch roof, making it muddled and unsightly. The application is to replace the current wooden extensions with a brick extension using the same brick and tiles currently used within the host dwelling. The proposed replacement extension is not going to be as wide as the current wooden extension, but deeper. This would free up 2.8 metres of frontage from the courtyard, opening up the views into the garden. A pre-planning application was submitted and a planning officer was assigned the case. His response stated, and I quote, "In terms of the additional floor space to be created by the proposal, I do not consider the extension to be excessively large or disproportionate to the host dwelling." The letter also refers to the removal of the existing unsympathetic flat roof. The final point was that the proposed roofing of the extension running north to south, as shown on the original sketch design, was overly dominant. We fully took this response on board, and the current application would redesign the roof the only other way possible by carrying on the existing twin pitch roof. The roof pitch is designed to be 0.5 metres below that of the host dwelling, meaning it is subservient. The revised application had carefully considered and satisfied all concerns raised. The feedback from the same planning officer to the revised full planning application was that he would recommend it to be rejected based on it is detrimental to the visual amenities of the area, the size of the extension is disproportionate to the host dwelling, and the design leads to an awkward junction of the existing twin pitch roof. In response to these three concerns, visually, the extension is at the back of the house with a private yard and outbuildings between this and the public road. Large mature trees obscure the dwelling, and it is also difficult to see unless forcefully trying to look over the foreground buildings. We therefore find it hard to see how the visual amenities will be affected. Also, there have been no objections along these lines by any of those who live around us. The disproportionate size. The initial response clearly stated he did not feel the size of the extension to be excessively large. His latest view is entirely contradictory. We do not want to live in a disproportionate building. The proposed extension is actually 2.8 metres narrower than what currently exists there. And finally, the roof design. This concern was taken fully on board first time round and resulted in a redesign the only other way possible.
Just under a minute, sir.
As the planning officer himself states, the current roof structure is unsympathetic, so we were surprised to hear that the extension of the current dwelling's twin roof described as awkward. It is an extension what is currently there. In conclusion, we consider that the proposed extension is well designed and in keeping with the original house. It replaces the existing unsightly flat roof structures, and we hope that you will support us in our endeavours to upgrade and modernise the house to suit the needs of me and my family. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you just switch off your big black button there, we'll see if members have any questions. Members? Tomlin?
Good evening. Could you just clarify again for me the treatment of the new roof, the subservience of the new roof, that you felt you would after discussion you felt that was necessary, or do you think did you do it in a bid to think that's what the borough would need? I mean, how have we? Could you just remind me how we came to this again, please?
Yeah, I mean, basically the original sketch drawing had a design which reflected the half-hip roof arrangements that are at the other end of the house, which personally I thought was, perfectly fine. The comment came back that that was too dominant, so the only other way really of trying to achieve a tiled roof, given what happens with the rest of the roof there, is what's drawn now.
Any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen. If you would like to withdraw, Councillor Raphael. Four minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to address the meeting. As you've heard, the background is that we have an old house previously extended and it needs improvement. The previous extension is insufficient for modern day needs and parts of it would never get permission now. There can be, I hope you agree, no doubt that what they are seeking to achieve is desirable. And I hope you also agree that there can be no doubt that what they are seeking to achieve will not adversely affect anybody else. And it certainly won't affect the overall appearance of the area or any of the things that might have been suggested in the officer's recent objections. The applicant made a good point, and you perhaps sensed a little bit of the frustration that he felt. The letter from the planning officer, and I'll just read a little bit more because it clarifies what Councillor Tomlin was asking. In terms of the additional floor space to be created by the proposal, this is obviously pre-application discussions, I do not consider the extension to be excessively large or disproportionate to the host dwelling. You'll note the difference now. However, I consider that the significant extension of the linear form of the roof would add significant mass and bulk to the northern and southern elevations of the dwelling, which would lead the proposal to appear disproportionately large and dominant in relation to the host dwelling to the detriment of its character. In other words, exactly the same footprint went before the officer then, except that the roof line was going to be continued along the same height. They therefore understood this to mean that you need to reduce the height to make it subservient, but there wasn't anything problem with where it was going to. And that was reinforced by the following sentence. As such, I must advise you that whilst I do not have an objection to the principle of a two-storey extension to the property, I consider it unlikely an application made on the basis of the submitted plans would meet with officer support. So, the roof's been reduced, and what it comes down to is this. I hope you will agree with this when you've had a chance to discuss it, that the proposal is perhaps the best that can be achieved for the property, taking account of where we are now with the difficulties with the roof. It is a question of understanding that perhaps to get a two-storey rear extension, there's got to be some compromise on the roof height and perhaps the roof layout. But when one looks at it in the round, none of that compromise. It creates a disproportionate building or something that's out of place for where it is in the village. And therefore I would urge you to approve this application.
Thank you for your brevity. Any questions for the ward member? Thank you, Mark. Questions to officers? Suddenly all gone very quiet, hasn't it? No? Discussion? Who went on the site visit? Anybody like to comment? Sven?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was able to go on the site visit, and I have to say I consider that what is being asked for is a quite considerable improvement on what's there at the moment. You can barely, if at all, see it from the road. And I think the suggestion for refusal that the proposal will be detrimental to the visual amenities of the area and the appearance of the dwelling in the street scene and character of the area. I really, with respect to the officers, I don't see that at all. I don't consider that it would be in any way detrimental. And I'd be happy to propose approval. Thank you.
I don't have much to add to what Councillor Goodison's already said, but having heard the arguments, I'm very sympathetic to approval on the basis of, I think it is in keeping, and I do think it is appropriate for this to happen.
It was just a question, really. I mean, I'm going down the same route, but we've got a situation here where we seem to be possibly coming to some consensus, but we've created a very complicated roof that just seems totally possibly unnecessary. Now, I don't know how we stand, because this is what's in front of us, but somehow there's been a little bit of a misunderstanding by the sounds of it, and if we were presented with a more geometrical and less awkward roof, would we oppose it? But is there any mechanism where we can sort of say the way it was agreeable? I don't know. I know it's not in front of us.
Sadly, the answer to your question is no, as you know, as I'm sure you were expecting. I mean, the comment really is that these things are subjective and very, very difficult, and we have this problem every time with the design factor, and people have different views on it, and it's unfortunate that the applicant felt he was doing what he'd been recommended to do, and that didn't turn out to be the case. And we know that often happens because it's very difficult for the officer at pre-application to be prescriptive, because he can't tell the applicant what to do. You just have to provide some guidance, and sometimes it's misunderstood. So that's how things were. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? That's approved, and I suspect that the reasons for approval are almost, as always on a subjective matter, the mirror image of the reasons for refusal, which there is no negative impact on the street scene. It doesn't damage the listed building, and the design is acceptable for a building in this location. Now, I just wanted to question, it's not a listed building or a poly? No, doesn't say anything about that. No, very nice though. Nice to know that we've got people who are in the same family since 1914 in a borough which suffers from such a huge turnover of people, including people like me who've only been here 35 years. Officers? There was a vote. Yeah, there was a show of hands, and you're going to tell us about conditions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So conditions would just be, we'd recommend a time limit condition and a materials to be submitted condition. There's also a condition from on ecology grounds from the biodiversity officer.
What was that last one? So what's the condition on? Is it in there?
Yes.
Well, I don't ask if it's in there, just haven't read it. That's my fault. Beg your pardon. Do item 6, land south of Church Lane, and I have I assume it's Mr. Mortar and Mr. Winfield. They're here. Who'd like to come forward? Are you together or separate? One of you will present the case. That's fine. No, we're delighted with that. That's no problem. If you just come forward and sit right at the front there, sir, if you would, where that box is, and if you just sit there for a second while the officers present their report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal for the erection of 3 detached agricultural workers' dwellings with access off of Church Lane in Wolverton. The proposal is for dwellings to serve farm workers at Frith Farm. There is a plan that shows the location of Frith Farm in relation to the proposed application site. The application is recommended for refusal by officers as it's considered there is a lack of an agricultural need or an essential need to support the provision of 3 dwellings in this location. As such, officers consider that this is an isolated location, and in the absence of information and justification to support the dwellings, the principle of the development is unacceptable. There is also a concern in relation to the landscape and visual impact of the development and a reason for refusal in relation to a lack of Section 106 agreement. Turning to the update paper, you'll see that there is now an additional reason for refusal being suggested, which relates to the lack of an adequate biodiversity survey. Council's biodiversity officer considers that this site does have potential to support habitats for nesting birds and potentially other species, so we would require an ecological assessment to understand what species are on the land and whether any mitigation is required in advance of granting any planning permission on this site. The update paper also contains the notes of the viewing panel and some response to questions that were raised at the panel by Councillor Round and the applicant. There is also a note that there is an error in relation to Councillor Round and Councillor Bound in the names on the application, on the officer's report. But the recommendation remains for refusal with the additional condition. Thank you.
You have 4 minutes. If you rather press the large, wide black button.
Thank you,
That's
Chairman. I'm Bob Winfield. I would like to speak on behalf of my neighbours, Tony Mortimer and Nigel Armstrong, and myself. We own 3 of the 4 properties close to this proposed development, and we see no reason whatsoever that the council should. That the committee should disagree with all of the advice and information which points to a refusal. But on the other hand, we think it might be worth pointing out, summarising some of the key issues. First of all, the landscape issue, which is very important. It's in an exposed and very prominent position in the landscape. It is a sensitive landscape which is quite close to Wolverton Church, which is a Grade 1 listed building, and the development would be visually intrusive. Secondly, the drainage in Church Lane is a serious problem. Tony Mortimer, who owns the land immediately adjacent to this proposed development, has standing water on his land for most of the winter, and he has had flooding into his property on 2 occasions while he's been living there. Nigel Armstrong, a bit further away, has a cellar which needs to be pumped out regularly to avoid flooding. The reason for all this drainage problem is that the subsoil, there's a deep clay subsoil which has no soak away potential, very impermeable. All the drainage is on the surface, and this development would add considerably to the surface drainage problems. Then thirdly, there's the distance from this site to Frith Farm. The planning application makes several references to accommodation on the farm, near to the farm, proximity to the farm, easy access to the farm at short notice. This site is 2.7 miles away from Frith Farm. If you take a radius of 2.7 miles from Frith Farm, that takes in numerous houses, all of the housing in Heath End, and going a little bit further the other direction, a lot of suitable housing in Kingsclere, all of it very suitable for farm workers. Finally, is the legitimacy of the derogation of tied cottages for farm workers, because there's no indication in the application that the applicant wishes to expand his farming business at all, either taking on additional land or intensification of production. So we must assume that these cottages would be occupied by employees not involved in the farming business, or on an enterprise which is not farming, and therefore the derogation for tied cottages wouldn't apply. Thank you, Chairman, that's all.
Thank you so very much. Questions to the gentleman? Councillor Eakes, if you press your big black button, and then they'll do their... He presses his, and if you want to answer it, you press yours again.
Can I ask where the farming is exactly?
Where the farm is?
Yeah.
It's what's the Wheathold? Yes, sorry, Wheathold. It's down the far end of the Wheathold Drive, if you know that area. Yeah.
Hello. Oh, sorry, it's me. I beg your pardon. I just wanted to clarify with you, if I could. I mean, in terms of your comments about the isolated nature of the site that is being proposed for the 3 dwellings, having been on the site visit and looked at the site from Church Lane, I mean, I was aware that on the left, as you look into the site, there's Ivy Cottage, there's, I think, Laurel House. I'm looking at a plan while I say this. And then a little bit further away, there's a relatively new dwelling. I'm not quite sure what it's called, but, you know, okay, which is, so there are, would you accept, there are a number of dwelling houses which are within the vicinity of this site?
There's quite a long distance between Ivy Cottage and Kites Hill of open site. The site is prominent because it is it is visible from a long distance in many different directions, and at the moment it's a greenfield site, and there haven't been any new developments in that area. I mean, there's been redevelopment, but no new properties in that area for the best part of 100 years. It is a sensitive landscape area, as I said, close to Wolverton Church, which is a Grade 1 listed building.
Lost track of this, Sven.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Am I right in thinking that during the little discourse you gave us, you seem to be suggesting or implying that these cottages are not needed for people who are either working on this farm at the moment or who might be working on the farm at some future date. Is that your feeling, that it's not needed for people who currently work on the farm?
That's the assumption. Sorry. That's the assumption I've made on the basis that there's no evidence presented that the applicant wishes to expand his farming business. He already has tied cottages where presumably his used by his employees. There's no evidence presented that he wants to expand his farming business, either taking on additional land or any change in his business. So I have assumed, therefore, that he would use the accommodation for employees who are not involved in the farming part of his business. There's some other non-farming enterprise.
Councillor Leeks.
Excuse me, it's a follow-on question from my previous question. Now, we say the farm is at Wheathold.
Yes.
Is there tracks, etc., from Wheathold to here over the fields that we get him here rather than use the main road? That's the question. First one.
There are no tracks. There is a very difficult footpath, but you wouldn't take any vehicle through the footpath. The footpath is muddy and difficult and overgrown and through woodland.
And I'm right in thinking that in the 60s this used to have a big agricultural show on.
Well, indeed, before my time in Wolverton, the area adjacent to this site was the county showground for several years, and the county showground had a lot of drainage problems because of this very impermeable clay subsoil.
I can only just remember it.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, sir. If you'd like to withdraw. You have the applicant. Oh, right. Right. Okay, you have 4 minutes.
Right, well, evening. Traditionally, farms and estates have always been able to produce accommodation for their farm workers and their families. The farm in my lifetime has grown from farming 150 acres to farming over 800 acres of herbs. Nearly 300 acres is now in chamomile, of which we are the biggest producers in the world. We are the only growers of the specific variety of peppermint and one of 2 producers of the English perennial sage in the UK. We now have a specialist team of 9 people working on the farm, from field work to making sure that the end products, the dried herbs and the essential oils, are of the quality that the pharmaceutical, the flavour and the fragrance industries demand. In this specialist work, the team are harvesting 11 months of the year, cropping over 1,200 acres. We cut 2 or 3 times a year on some of the herbs. Our aim is to keep growing and producing these world-renowned essential oils and dried herbs from this farm in Hampshire for the next 3 generations. And to continue growth on the farm, we need to have our team living on the farm. When my grandfather arrived at the farm, there were houses available in the village of Ashford Hill, supplied by the council, for those who worked on the farm. These have now gone due to the sale of council houses in the 70s and 80s and the London overspill. There is now no suitable accommodation in the area for our workers, so the farm must step up and fill this void. These proposed cottages are essential for the future, due to the specialist nature of the business. These cottages bring affordable housing to those who work in agriculture back into the area. The design has been chosen to fit in with the area. They are proper farm workers' cottages. These are small 2-bedroom cottages and are an appropriate size for an agricultural worker to live in with their family. The plot has been chosen as it is close enough to use the local amenities of Kingsclere and the local parish of Wolverton and Borkhurst. It is certainly within walking distance of the main farm holding, and the plot sits between two dwellings in an unused grass paddock. So it does not impact on highly valuable and long established crops. Paragraph 5 of the National Planning Policy Framework states, agricultural workers' dwellings should be approved when it meets the essential need for a rural worker to live permanently at or near to their place of work in the countryside. Our enterprise has need for these essential cottages. To grow, we need to be able to provide an accommodation package for skilled workers, for those who are trained specifically in dealing with the specialised crops, and for those who work in agriculture. For these workers need to be available at short notice to ensure that we have the maximum efficiency within this specialist farming that we do. Thus, enabling the enterprise to be supported and to support not only the people who work on the farm, but the local community who reside within the parishes of Borkhurst, Wolverton and Ashford Hill.
Thank you very much. You're well within your time. Members' questions, Councillor Bound and then Councillor Goodison.
Hi, Charlotte. You said nine workers. Aside from the sort of the family, how many extra workers are there on top?
Count 4 permanent boys, as I call them, who are doing the tractor driving to the harvesting to the finishing product, and then I dive in and out of the office and I'm on the distillery as his father. You've got the farm manager sitting behind, and we bring in a couple of students who are generally agricultural students to then come and learn about the business and help as an extra. Plus we have the girls in the office as well.
So these 3 proposed dwellings, for how many workers would they be?
They would be for 3 of the workers, yeah.
And where do these people live at the present time?
2 of them live the other side of Basingstoke, and 1 of them lives the other side of Newbury.
So in terms of the need on the farm at the moment, who looks after the farm in these times where you need these people sort of immediately?
Currently, one of us, or the farm manager, sorry, is there, but he cannot, as most people need to sleep every 24 hours, be on site 24/7 when we're running kit 24/7, and most people are on shift work. And so for the boys to be there when there's an emergency, bear in mind we have the dryer and the distillery running at the same time, and for hearsay things go very wrong at the same time, you're going to need more people who know what they're doing to potentially have a shutdown mechanism. And bear in mind that the cottages are 5 minutes away, if that, by car. They're not having to come for half an hour from Newbury or Basingstoke. Ooh.
So at the moment, these people will come in from Basingstoke or wherever to fulfil the need on the farm.
For an emergency, you're very much relying on the farm manager being on site 24/7. And we're growing to such an extent that we cannot rely on one person alone.
Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Chair. First quick question. Am I right in assuming that you're operating equipment on there which runs all day and all night and is functioning during the night and needs looking after?
Well, during harvest, we've got a big bean harvester and a big forage harvester running at the same time during the daylight hours harvesting. And then with an overnight during harvest, on our main harvest period, we run a 16-hour shift, sometimes a 24-hour shift, depending what weather's coming in, depending if the crop is going over, and that's where the essential need is we've got people running that, harvesting, spraying, and one person can't do all of it.
So there are occasions when you need people on site 24 hours. And I noticed here on the update, could you just confirm, it says since the report was completed, the agent has written in to advise as follows, and then it goes on, the occupation of the dwellings hereby permitted shall be limited to a... No. So... Apologies, Chairman. I just would like you to confirm that the comments made by the agent, by your agent, that the occupation of the dwellings hereby permitted, should they be permitted, shall be limited to a person solely or mainly working or at least working in the locality in agriculture or in forestry, or a widow or widower of such a person, and to any resident dependents. In addition, the applicants would agree to the principle of a 106 agreement to tie the proposed buildings to the enterprise at Frith Farm, so that they should be retained in one ownership and in one possession at all times. And can you confirm that that's acceptable to you?
Yes, very, because it means it stays within agriculture.
Back to Councillor Brown.
Sorry, there was just one other question. The harvest time, over what period is the harvest time, your really busy time?
Well, to give you an example, we finished parsley last week. We've given everyone a few days off for Christmas, and we start on sage on the 2nd of January, and we will then continue to run for the rest of the year again. Yeah.
Councillor Tucker.
Thank you. Sorry, one or two minor things, I hope. One is Mr. Winfield mentioned the difficulties of getting from that site to your main farm. When we were on site, you indicated that it was passable by vehicles. Is that right? Sorry.
Yes, that's correct. In fact, just as your minibus pulled out, the local postie drove past and waved and carried on down the track, because there is one little cottage that's privately owned that is under his postal delivery, and he goes that way to get to it because it's quicker than going all the way around towards the Kingsclear Ashford Hill Road and down the other side of the track.
That sounds like good rural postman you've got there. The other thing is I do know how terribly wet the whole area is, and I go to church, Orpington Church, so I talk to the local people, and one farmer did say that he had farmed that land and said how absolutely awful it was because the water just comes up. And I know, because I used to represent the area for Hampshire, the problems that we have with the water just running down the road down Crabs Hill, because the water is. Have you looked into the problems of the water with regard to any building that you might have there?
I think nowadays with wonderful technology, French drains and a good digger, we'll be able to sort out any drainage problems. There shouldn't be any, as there's a huge ditch running between the golf course and any of the plots down Church Lane, and it depends on how well drained the actual paddocks that they have in the backs of their gardens are. Now, we would have a paddock at the back, and we would make sure that the drainage went all the way down to the ditch, and then we can grade the ditch back towards our farmland on the other side of the big house, the Kites Hill house, and then take that away down to the natural springs and the stream. So that would be easy to be done.
Could I just say to the committee, if you were minded to approve the application, then a condition requiring details for submission of surface water drainage would be entirely appropriate.
You've just mentioned the golf course. When we were standing there, you could see the people playing golf were all very nice, but perhaps they might not like seeing quite so much of new houses if they were built. Would you be prepared to put some kind of tree screen or something there?
I think the idea would be to make sure that the gardens were as cosy as possible if people have children, and also for a bit of windbreak, it would be nice to put some trees back in there and maybe an orchard or something. Who knows? But yes, we've definitely thought about sort of relaying some hedges, and that can all be done.
Any other questions?
I'm not sure how concerned I am about the visual amenities of golfers, but in terms of what we heard from the first speaker, sorry if you mentioned this and clarified it, forgive me really, but I think it was suggested that there are tied cottages relating to the farm, and by definition they're able to be used now. Can you just clarify the situation with that, please?
Yes, that's fine. Mum and Dad are in the main farmhouse. Farm manager is in the manager's cottage, and my grandparents, who are 92, are in the other cottage, and I don't think Grandpa would quite be up for sorting out an alarm system. So that's why we felt we had a need to house people that necessarily can't afford to live in the area, but live and work in agriculture would be why those cottages would be aimed for.
I think we had the answer to it in slightly different terms, but can I just clarify? The intention would be, if this were granted, that the farm would own the dwellings and let them to employees?
Generally, what you tend to do is so that employees aren't having to then fork out for rent. You would supply them with a package, and the house would be within the package, and that's how it always used to be. So yes, the farm will own them, but they will be within the package for those working on the farm, so their families can live in the local area, go to the local school, be involved in the local community.
I mean, the real point I'm trying to make is that the employees would not have any ownership rights or long-term rights, or they would have long-term rights. I'm just trying to see.
I think the nitty-gritty probably comes down to what the council would want from tying the cottages to the farm in an agricultural sense. Well, I mean, I haven't really thought of it as far as that, to be perfectly fair.
I mean, in respect of planning, I mean, there's the condition which we've already said that we would accept in terms of the agricultural occupancy condition, but to tie the actual properties to the enterprise, to the land. But I mean, in terms of the actual nitty-gritty, in terms of how the arrangement work, I suppose that's a matter for the business to look at with the employees at the time.
I think normally nowadays it's very unlikely to have a lifetime tenancy in agriculture, purely because people who work in agriculture tend to live in that area for their whole of their lifetime, working lifetime. But then if there was a need for more cottages, if we grew and these people were using in lifetime tenancies, I don't know, it's a very difficult one. I think it would have to be discussed if we got the application or not.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, for allowing me the time to address you. Just a couple of points on that last discussions. The properties would be part of the package, as the applicant said, and therefore part of the job. I think the applicant forgot to mention that normally a Sunday roast would normally be part of the package as well for the farm workers. I'm here to ask you to support this application. Of course, it's right that we protect the open countryside from inappropriate development. But this application is not inappropriate. It will bring a form of affordable rented accommodation to an affluent rural area, which is something that we rarely see these days. In the norm, we see applications in the countryside for 6 and 8 bed dwellings. But this unique application is very different. These 3 modest dwellings have been carefully designed so as to provide the right balance to blend with existing developments without taking an archaic view that farm workers should live in a 2 up and 2 down terrace dwelling. Such modest rented accommodation is desperately needed for the vitality of an affluent rural community, where one will be expected to pay something like 600,000 up to maybe £2 million for a home. The site has been carefully considered. The dwellings will form an infill approach within the lane, which has sporadic development, and it carefully avoids placing the dwellings within a completely isolated field or location. The farm workers living in the accommodation will have access to an existing community, access to their place of work and access to the Kingsclere Centre. A short walk away there is a bus service serving the wider area. I know officers have commented about my comments at the viewing, and you know, at the end of the day it is a 10, maybe 15-minute walk to the farm, and as the applicant has said earlier on, the postman goes down the track every day with his little van, so it won't be too difficult for vehicles to use that. So really it is 5 minutes away in a van. Those that express concern that this will set a precedent should remember that such dwellings can only arrive in the countryside if there are exceptional circumstances. So approving this application on the basis that there is an essential need for workers and the farming business cannot set a precedent for a flood of similar applications. A prosperous and growing farming enterprise is rather unique and should be supported. The applicant's agricultural consultant demonstrated an essential need for the farming business and the workers themselves. The benefits of this development will far outweigh the minimal harm that may be caused to the landscape character of the area. Members who visited the site will have seen that the location has been carefully selected. The applicant has worked to ensure that the development sits in the countryside and not on it. Of course we should try to avoid isolated new homes in the countryside, but it has been demonstrated that the benefits to the rural community, the farm workers themselves and their families, together with the benefits to the rural farming business, will outweigh any harm the development might create, and to some degree the issues of isolation is further mitigated because of the good access to the place of work. And as I said,
just under a minute, Greg.
Thank you, and I've said the good access to others. Please approve this application for the following reasons. Careful selection of the site and its proximity to the future residents' place of work, the short distance to Kingsclere Centre and a local bus service, and the benefits to the rural workers and the farming enterprise far outweigh concerns raised related to the isolated site location. An essential need has been demonstrated, and this unique rural enterprise should be supported. The good design of the dwellings and careful siting within the plot will outweigh any adverse impact on the visual amenity and the landscape character of the area. The existence of a legal agreement to ensure that the dwellings are tied to the ownership of the farming land will provide additional surety that these dwellings will be occupied by farm workers and those having worked in farming.
Thank you kindly. Questions, members? Thank you, Graham. Kathy, are you there?
Good evening, Chair, Committee. I'm speaking as the ward member, one of the ward members, Councillor Sherlock being the other, for the Kingsclere ward in which Frith Farm sits. The applicant is one of our constituents, and I was instrumental when we came to planning with Chamomile Cottage. I've looked very closely at the document NPPF, para 55, and I have to say that there is sufficient justification to support the provision of these 3 additional farm cottages. Special circumstances do exist, and we, I think, as a borough, should grant this application for new housing. The farm is busy and expanding business, and I've noted this since Chamomile Cottage was built. Harvesting of the herbs, as we hear, takes place throughout the year, and the farm workers are required throughout the harvesting. And with the inclement weather we've got, they really do need to be on site because they have to stop, and as soon as it stops raining, out they go again. It would be advantageous for them to live near the farm, as the herbs grown have specific and relatively intensive husbandry requirements, and these I have seen myself, and special equipment. We've heard how the manager and the farm owner are on 24-hour call. If we had these workers on site, we then could look at some succession planning, and the workers would be readily available at most times to meet the need of the business. And here it is the business, a thriving business in the countryside, and we need to grow the economy in the countryside, and we need our workers. We've heard that the 3 existing dwellings cannot be used because of grandparents the parents and the farm manager in the other dwellings. It's not isolated. I, on many occasions, have walked from the church at Wolverton over the fields into Kingsclere, where there is a bus service, and it doesn't take very long. The thing I would then like to come to is housing. We have a shortage of rented housing in and around the area, and I looked at the agricultural report, and I would like to know where within the 3 miles we can find rented accommodation, because I have people waiting in the village for housing, and we do not have it. And these workers, if rented accommodation did become available, it would not be within their salary bracket to do so. So I firmly ask that you please approve this. The building of these 3 properties is needed to protect the sustainability and growth of the business through the provision of cheaper and work-related accommodation, i.e. the house goes with the job, as we've heard. And I ask that you approve it under NPPF, para 5.5 and E1 and E6. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Any questions for the councillor? No, thank you very much. Mike, did you want to speak now, or would you rather speak after we've had questions to officers? Thank you. Questions to officers?
I'm sure we'll return to this, Chairman. I think it's probably going to be a feature of this, really. But in regard to what we've mused about tonight in terms of the principle of under a 106 agreement tying the proposed dwellings into the enterprise at Frith Farm, heaven forbid I say this in a way, but I mean, if the business were not to be as successful as it is currently in putting it on the line, which go out of business, how would that legal agreement then be applied? I mean, simply, would it, in terms of the legal agreement we're talking about, be tied specifically to one business, or would they automatically continue as agricultural workers' cottages for a lifetime? I'm not sure how that would apply, really, in terms of the way you tie something into a business which we hope will be there for a long, long time ahead. We've heard 3 generations ahead, and I wish them well, but in the event of things changing, what happens in those circumstances?
Thanks, Shane. In the wording of the 106 on irrelevant condition, we would use the word "and in the locality." So we would tie it to Frith Farm, but "and in the locality" as well. If in the circumstance that Frith Farm was no longer there, and in the locality there was no need for the agricultural workers' dwellings, and at some point in the future an application could be submitted to remove that condition, remove that tie, to enable them to just become general open market dwellings in the countryside.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask the officer, I mean, would you agree that the MPPF does seem to provide some justification for us to at least consider approval here rather than refusal? Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think everyone can understand the applicant's desire, and certainly 100, 200 years ago this is what used to happen. But that was before the planning policy framework that we work within today. And in determining planning applications, we have to be mindful of what the planning policy framework says. And that framework says there has to be an essential need for a worker to be on hand at most times to meet the needs of the business. In this particular instance, there are already 3 agricultural dwellings on the site that are occupied by 4 people, and those 4 people, as in the report, are on hand at most times. The other running of the business is done by employees, as in any other business that would work on shifts. So in our view, and in the view of the Council's agricultural consultant, there is an essential need, but that need is already met by the existing dwellings on site. And the planning policy framework doesn't allow you to do what used to happen 100, 200 years ago in providing those dwellings. So members either have to be satisfied that there is an essential need. If you're not satisfied there is an essential need, then you would move towards a refusal. Paragraph 55 allows you to look at the location and consider whether this is an isolated location or not an isolated location, and would the development support a rural community. So there's 2 aspects to consider. One is the essential need, and one is the location of the development, in addition then to the landscape biodiversity and other issues that we've raised in the report.
A quick supplementary. Am I not right in thinking that until such time as our draft policy may or may not finally become accepted, that the MPPF is the senior planning document? Thank you.
That's right. In terms of assessing the need for new development in the countryside, we have no current adopted plan, a policy within our plan in relation to agricultural workers' dwellings. We just have D6, and D6 talks about one form replacement of an existing dwelling or conversion of existing building. So for a new dwelling, we then have to refer to the MPPF paragraph 55.
You talk about D6. What about D7? Is that not relevant to this one at all?
D7 is no longer a saved policy within our plan, so it'll still appear in the text, but it wasn't saved when in, I think, 2009, 10. It was not a saved policy.
It seems a bit of a pity because it's so relevant to this one, isn't it? For goodness sake, it's exactly what we're discussing.
Yeah, the reason that that particular one wasn't saved was because at the time it was viewed to repeat national guidance, and the guidance at the time was that local authorities shouldn't repeat national guidance in their policies.
Yes. I mean, we have within our midst a really successful sort of thriving business, and I suppose that we need to encourage those sorts of things within our borough. But what's before us at the moment is 3 new houses in the countryside for workers who come in from, I think Charlotte said, from Basingstoke or wherever they come. They are already employed. They already live within presumably commuting distance of the farm, otherwise they wouldn't be doing the job that they are. And as has already been said, there are 3 dwellings at Frith Farm occupied by 4 people. I don't think, nothing I've heard this evening leads me to believe that 3 new dwellings, and I'm not quite sure why 3, because there are 3 single workers that have to be accommodated, presumably, why there are 3 dwellings required in the countryside. I don't think the justification from the speakers that I've heard so far has convinced me. I'm more than prepared to listen to the rest of the debate.
Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I've listened very carefully to what everyone has said, and listening to the objectors first in terms of a very good argument that was just reflected, I think, in terms of the importance of the countryside, set against a very eloquent presentation about the business. You've got 2 very distinct competing elements here, haven't you? The desire to protect the countryside in one element from a very important location, and alongside it, the desire to have a very good, thriving business. The balance of that, in my head, comes down on this question of the MPPF in paragraph 55, and I do think it justifies a decision to approve. Then the question becomes, on balance, does the need to protect the countryside outweigh that? This is one occasion where I would argue that inward migration to our borough is appropriate in this condition, in this occasion. I think we should welcome employees into our borough in that context. I like the argument, of course I do, wouldn't I not, the argument about affordable housing in the countryside for working, and to have that element of a breadth of quality of those housing. Of course I'm going to appreciate that argument, I'm sure others do as well. So on the balance of all of this, at the moment, I don't see a reason to reject the application, because I think the case for me on balance has been made that it is needed and that it is essential to the continued growth of the business. The issue I would have looking forward is, okay, the business is where it is now and these 3 dwellings are needed. Were the business to grow considerably in the future, and I'm sorry I've now got 6, 7, 8, however many, there has to be some point along the line where you say, actually, you can't just keep repeating this. And I'm sure that's not what the applicant is actually saying. So my feeling about this is, in this case, on the merits of this application, I can see an argument for approving it through paragraph 55 of the MPPF. Set against what you said, Catherine, I do appreciate the officer's point about our safe policies. So at the moment, Chair, I would be minded to vote in favour of an approval and not a rejection.
Perhaps I could try and well, I think he's making his own view known. Just try and provide a little context. It seems to me that existing policies may not, and this is a view you might take, that existing policies with regard to agricultural workers' dwellings haven't quite foreseen this type of operation as a rural enterprise. Typically, agricultural dwellings are tied to livestock requirements, the care of animals, which is clearly requires somebody to be available 24/7. If you apply those policies, I'm confident officers are right in that there is not going to be a good case, and it's been dismissed by the agricultural advisors. But you could take the view that policy hasn't quite foreseen this type of agriculture or horticulture or whatever, which is a very specialist in its nature, and where the nature of the crop and the almost continuous harvesting of that crop, and indeed on-site processing of this crop, because if you tried to then shift it around the world, as Vodafone, not Vodafone, as Vitacress have started a long time to do, you go down some path that you might not want to finish up at the end of. So one is immensely sympathetic to the idea that this sort of enterprise should be supported. And that this may be that it's a different style of agricultural need from something that we've ever seen before, at least in this committee, and I've no idea whether there are any precedents anywhere. Perhaps if there were, they might have been told to us, but probably there aren't. It was said that this is the largest of its kind in Europe for some products. Against that, many a farmer would like to be able to offer employees an employment package including housing. And I can just see some of our farmer community around here picking this up and saying, well, hold on, if I need to have some low-cost workers on my farm and I can't get them to come here, and they're coming here from the other side of Newbury or the other side of Reading or whatever, and it's just mission impossible, and I need them on my farm. So if looked at it from that point of view, that there is an issue. It is the view of officers that if members were to be minded to approve this, officers would clearly take the view that this would be against policy. And because it's against policy, it would go to P&I. And at P&I, somebody would have to represent this committee to explain to P&I why an against policy application should be approved. No question. I don't think there'd be any question that that would happen, because the officers would say it has to go to P&I because it's against policy. That's clearly their view. It's not a subtle thing about opinion as to whether it's right or wrong. It's a set of facts. So I just wanted to put that context to members before you say any more about it or move to any kind of vote. It is a very, very unusual to me, very unusual and very difficult case. Diane, I hope one or two more people will speak here.
Yes, I mean, this one's really puzzling me. You say it's against policy. This all comes down to essential need. Basically, that's the only thing we need to look at is essential need. And we've got two agricultural reports here. One, I believe, must have been commissioned by the applicant, in which it says there is an essential need. And the other one was a consultant commissioned by the council, which says in the first paragraph there is the need for the dryer and distillery to be overseen. That's what the first paragraph deals with, and it says that that's dealt with by the existing dwellings. Sorry, I'm on page 89, sorry. So the first paragraph of our own council consultant says that there is a need for overseeing of the dryer and distillery, and in their opinion that could be accommodated by the existing dwellings. But it does in the second paragraph say, it's getting near there, it's talking about relatively intensive level of care, and it would be beneficial to have staff located close to the farm. So we've got one essential, one beneficial, and you know, who am I to sort of argue with these people who are the experts? So I'm sort of wavering about whether it's against policy or not, because I'm not convinced that it isn't essential. And I would rather, I mean, I haven't decided yet, but I would rather support a herb farm than a solar farm any day. And so my default would always be to support farming in this borough. Not both, no, just one.
And Potter. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
When we get an application such as the one before us tonight, I always ask myself one question. Who is in the best position to decide if there is a need for cottages or accommodation for farm workers? And I tend in this case to come down on the farmer. He runs a business, he knows his expectations and what he needs to do to reach that target. Develop and expand the business. I think that's crucial in the modern days with farms. Too many of our farmers goes to the wall. Or is it the officers who protect our policies, give us advice, or objectors who can only look from the outside? I tend to believe in this case because it's unique. It's the farmer, and I'd be quite happy to support this application.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a very awkward one, really. All things are balancing. I mean, on one hand, I see this certainly in line with how the officers have portrayed that this is a farm where it grows its commodity. It's then processing it as an industry, and it needs equipment mining 24/7. Industry manages that by employing people, and they have to travel to work because it's an industry. We've had before us many a time where we sympathise with the farmer and the family, and because there's livestock, and you've explained that in your summing up of it. So it's this balance. I think some of the key thing is that there is not, again, affordable accommodation in the rural community. And I have to say, I don't believe we have a mechanism of making that happen. And it goes back then to saying that the way it was done was that farms employed local people, so they provided the housing. And the dilemma I've got is that clearly policy, the government policy, the planning policy, is not allowing us to go back to the way it was. So I have to say, I'm sitting on the fence here, and I just need to join in with more, listen to more comments. Thank you.
Just for the benefit of the webcast, because people sometimes do track through these things with complicated matters, that there is now available facilities for dwelling in the countryside. Firstly, you can have rural exception sites. I'm working on 2 rural exception sites at the moment in my ward. Second, you can have community right to build, and I'm working on a community right to build project in my ward, which would deliver houses where they wouldn't be allowed. And then you've got neighbourhood planning, which is a rather heavyweight thing. But if we finish up with a policy that allows development as it might on the edge of every settlement, then people will be well advised to get ahead with neighbourhood planning pretty quickly, in my opinion. So there are policies now available nationally which allow for dwellings in and around settlements, not just within settlement policy boundaries or on allocated sites. So that is not the case, and I just want to make sure that we are clear that, in my view, and officers will certainly take this view, but my own view is that there is not a policy that currently supports this. And the policy may be wrong, but from the way this policy has been implemented on agricultural dwellings in the countryside, all of the applications appealed to date that I'm aware of have not succeeded in anything other than using the conventional mechanisms for assessing it. And it seems to me highly unlikely that anybody would agree, if the thing went to appeal, which of course is open to the applicants if it were refused here. It seems unlikely that on appeal, and officers may take a different view, that there would be an agreed need, even in exceptional circumstances, that's proved to be 3 people and 3 dwellings. And there's a quantum as well as a quality thing here. So I'm not arguing against the case. I'm just trying to make sure we all understand, as we discuss it, what we think the baseline of policies is. I had Councillor Bowen, then Councillor Potter, then Councillor Harvey.
I'm listening to the debate here, Chair, and I'm not being convinced that the proposal should go. That the proposal from the applicant should be approved. I still haven't heard anybody convince me that there is a need here. It's quite some distance from Frith Farm. whoever's going to make that walk in the winter time, I don't know. It's going to be a pretty long trek. I would suspect that they're going to have to resort to a car journey. If they're resorting for a car journey from there, they can very well be coming from Balkhurst, Tadley, Basingstoke. To me, the need hasn't been made. And I actually would move this, I would move the officer recommendation.
May I say something funny? But as a member of PNI, having just taken advice from the officer, and as a substitute member to this committee, I'm going to recuse myself from this point and not vote or take part in the vote or anything of the recommendation at this point, if that's okay.
But just to be clear on that, if it goes to PI, I would not be able to speak. I'm not proposing to accept myself from this committee, so I would withdraw myself from PI, and somebody else would have to represent the committee at PI if I vote, which I probably will. You're going to withdraw, or are you?
Yes, I've taken advice as well, Chair. I'm the chairman of PNI, and I'm going to recuse myself from the committee now, and certainly I'm not voting and not commenting on this application.
Quite right too. Anybody who wishes to be able to address this matter on PI will be well advised now to not pursue the matter further in this committee, because you will have be regarded as potentially prejudiced. If you want to vote and speak and vote at PI on this matter, I would withdraw at this stage. Sit and listen. No, I don't think you do need. Well, you can have legal advice on that, but I mean, that's a personal opinion. It's a personal matter whether you decide whether you're prejudiced or not when you get to PI. But if you vote here one way or the other, then I think you would be prejudiced at PI. There's no doubt about that, Sven. On the same matter. No. Well, I've got other speakers coming. We've been moved for the officer recommendation, which was refusal. But if there's nobody rushing to second that, I'm quite happy to continue with those I already had listed to speak, which was Chris, I think. No, George. We heard from Mike. You've done. Lost contact here. David, in that case.
I mean, facing the same dilemma as everybody else, obviously, getting a bit anxious, I must admit. If we go on like this, I might be the one, if we approve it, is presenting something to P&I, which would worry me greatly, I think. But, you know, with my non-farming knowledge. But it certainly does seem, I mean, I've always found it reasonably easy, I say with my background, to understand the essential aspects of livestock farms and that immediacy of having skilled people around, you know, when the emergencies occur and all the rest of it. I find this one a lot more difficult than that. But on the other hand, obviously with the sort of diversity of farming now, I mean, these are the sort of things that we're going to face, I think, more and more in regard to what are going to be nearly 24/7 operations, perhaps nearly all through the year. And I think we've got to be realistic about that. It is also the case, I think, and I think Councillor Oselton made reference to it, from my limited knowledge of the area, I mean, it's a high price property area. The rental in those properties as well, where they're available, must be massively high, certainly outside of the realms of the sort of agricultural workers that we're talking about. And to be frank, unless farm owners make these sorts of things available to their workers, I don't know what the answer is, because, you know, some of the commuting distances are unrealistic. And as I think Councillor Taylor has said, I mean, it's not exactly equivocal, but certainly some of the advice from the experts appear to be, in one case saying, yes, there is an essential need, and the other one saying, well, there might be, or getting close to saying that. So I think we could move down that road in terms of saying we are satisfied in this particular circumstance, and having regard, I know, to the way the policy perhaps hasn't caught up with, dare I say it, our analysis of this, and we've got to try progressively to do something about it. I think there is a case to be made on this occasion, and if it can be conditioned, and I was anxious about that, but I think Catherine explained that, if it can be conditioned in the way that people have talked about in terms of the life of Frith Farm and its future economic viability and all the rest of it, then I think that's something we could look at as well under a 106 agreement.
Councillor Sherlock and then Councillor Goodison.
I entirely agree with what
Councillor Potter's just said, and also what was said earlier by Councillor Osselton. And we have here a unique and viable business growing and deserves our support. And there is a great dearth of houses available in that part of the world. It is an expensive part of the world. And so I would like to propose it for to my doing.
Seconded. Oh no.
I want to go.
No,
I want to go.
It hasn't been seconded for refusal, so you're going to propose it for approval.
Yes, I would like to propose it for approval, please.
And that's, are you going to speak as well?
I would only make the point that I fully accept that that there is an argument about whether it's needed or not needed, and whether it's essential or not essential. I do agree with, once again, surprisingly, with Councillor Potter. But I just would point out that the reasons for refusal, apart from that issue, the development is located in an isolated location, and the applicant has failed to demonstrate an essential need for the additional permanent dwelling. It's not in an. It is in part of. The site is part of a small hamlet. It's not in an isolated position in that sense. And the second is, as proposed dwellings would have an adverse impact on the visual amenity and landscape character of the area and the locality, and is therefore unacceptable in landscape and design terms. Well, I really don't see that at all. I don't see that it would have an adverse impact on the visual amenity, and I don't think those two reasons by themselves run at all. So I'm happy to second the proposal for approving the application.
Just to be clear on the relative merits of things, those are what I call subjective conclusions and can be going either way, no doubt, but I think it's pretty clear that as policy stands, this is against policy, and therefore the reason for refusal would stand unless you think that the policy is sufficiently unclear that it might be passed on appeal, which is the alternative approach. Councillor Leeks.
I'm beginning to feel that I should go supporting the applicant. You know, there's always been tide cottages, not just with farming, but with railways, with waterways, with mining. You can go on and on and on. Not always living on top of the job. Certainly with waterways, I mean, you used to get the old lock keepers, didn't you? And it's there for the railway cottages in Basingstoke. I just think, years and years ago, if they had to go through this rigmarole of getting planning permission, they'd never got anything built, but in respect of tide cottages. So I've listened. Again, I came along here with an open mind. I've came along with the cold and flu as well, but never mind about that. But I'm seeing, and I believe that we're going to make the right decision here in allowing it. I know the area very well. You're not far from the A339. Myself, I wouldn't like to have to get on a bus there, but that's down to the individuals. And of course, there is now a new bus that goes from Kingsclear to Tadley.
Before it moves.
Thank you, Chair. Just one thing, the Councillor Bound mentioned that the 5 minutes or the half an hour. If you live at the other side of Basingstoke, the other side of Newbury, the damage will be done to anything machinery you've done if you were required in a hurry. Half an hour is the minimum it'll get you from the other side of Newbury or Basingstoke to machinery that's going wrong.
I think you may be misinterpreting what he thinks he said, but he'll tell us that himself.
All I'm saying is the need is taken care of already, Chair.
I'd like to, somebody like to move standing orders, hopefully, for only a very few minutes. No, no, it's going to go on another 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We do have one. Yes? Thank you. Those in favour? Yes, thank you. If there's nobody else wants to speak, the lead officer would like to give us some advice.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a very, you said already, a unique application in some ways, and I think the debate so far has proven that. What I would just remind members of is this test of essential need. And essentially, there was discussion around the growth of the business, and clearly that is an issue that needs to be considered and weighted. In the normal set of circumstances, where essential need is being assessed on what might happen in future, there would be a sort of a temporary mobile home provider for a period of 3 years. That was the approach that would normally be taken more typically in relation to the sort of livestock type applications that the committee has dealt with before. And as I say, I do appreciate that this is a slightly unique situation. If that was demonstrated, that essential need was there, beyond the 3 dwellings that are already on site, and appreciate that there are issues there around who occupies those dwellings at this moment in time, then I think the first point of call would be a dwelling, a single dwelling to meet that essential need. And I do find it difficult to establish a clear justification as to why there would be an essential need for 3 dwellings on that basis. And that leads on to my final point, which is in relation to the suggested sort of conditional section 106. I think it would be difficult to argue that would be a robust position to take in terms of the validity of the condition or the section 106 on the grounds that it is for 3 dwellings. It's not for a single dwelling meeting an essential need, it would be 3 dwellings. And I think that would be, as I say, difficult to justify as part of the planning permission.
Chris.
I think hearing that as well, I'm now going to second Councillor Bounds.
You can't do that. It's been moved and seconded for approval.
Oh, sorry.
You can only come back and I think if it wasn't seconded before he moved approve. I don't know. Advice?
We'll have, because the first, or rather the second motion for approval has been first and seconded, that now stands. Obviously, if discussion goes the other way or the vote goes the other way, then we go back to position.
We'll come back to the motion. Can we, I don't know how we do this, but somebody will have to offer to speak at PI.
Thank you, Chairman. With the assistance of Councillor Potter, I'd be happy for the 2 of us to address P&I. Thank you.
I rather suspect that members of the public present may not understand what we're talking about. Have you explained it satisfactorily, what we're talking about, PI? We're talking jargon here, Planning and Infrastructure Committee, which is the policy committee on this sort of thing. And if we approve something against policy, which is clearly against policy, it's not a decision. We've just made that decision. It has to be ratified by another committee, or it can be reversed by another committee. So I'm sorry, you'll have to wait until it comes round again, and that's just the nature of the beast. There's nothing we can do about that, whatever members say here. Now, reasons for approval, please. I should have had those before we voted. I'm sorry, breaking my own rules already.
Well, I suppose the main reason is that the question of whether it's for or against policy is a little bit ambiguous, and a case can be made to argue that it's a justified approval.
What you're saying is that in the view of the committee,
in the view
there is an essential agricultural need for 3 dwellings.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the reason for approval.
Yeah.
And that any impact on the countryside, blah blah blah, whatever the other things might be, is insufficient to outweigh the importance of that agricultural need, essential agricultural need.
On a point of clarification, can I just ask the legal officer, when we address when the matter is considered by P&I, I was under the impression that if P&I did not wish to support the committee, the DC, they would send it back to DC for consideration. I seem to remember the last time we were involved in, and that was rather than overturning the decision. Thank you.
And I was just trying to explain that it's not now fait accompli at this stage. Do you want to tell us something?
I could not confirm 100% that that's the situation, but that, so far as I'm aware, is the situation. It would come back to DC. Yes, but I mean, if that's something I can certainly confirm behind the scenes, and send an email tomorrow for you.
And if we can make sure that the applicant is given that advice and given the notice of what process then takes place, and it might be that the applicant might be invited to speak at P&I or wish to speak at P&I and so forth. So the applicant needs to be given clear advice as to what happens next. David.
Sorry, Chairman, I was only going to say in terms of our experience before, obviously we recall those applications that have gone before P&I. My understanding was, as I say with my words, whatever P&I determined, it comes back to DC. In one case, it would be ratification, presumably if P&I says, yes, we support the view you've expressed. Conversely, it would come back here for us to look at it again if P&I says no way. I mean, it's as straightforward as that, I think, isn't it, really?
You're quite right. The decision is made by this as the regulatory committee, one way or the other.
And can I just make the point, I know I've been volunteered by Councillor Goddison, but I mean, I'm obviously very happy to defer to the mover and seconder who have far more knowledge on these things than I. But
We'll note the fact that you and Councillor Goddison are the first in line for this, and if there is competition for it, no doubt that will take place at some stage. Officers, do you want to go on conditions?
Yeah, so standard time plans, material conditions. In addition, we'd be seeking a levels condition, a landscaping condition, ecological assessment to be undertaken of the site to hopefully not reveal any protected species, but if it does, then to deal with whatever the appropriate mitigation for that would need to be. Details of the access, landscaping, land contamination, construction management plan, parking, turning, cycles, bins, details are to be provided, and a Section 106 agreement and a form of occupancy tie as well.
Given some of the evidence that's been put before us, which admittedly is hearsay, but I assume it's correct, that we might ask for something to be done about making sure there's a drainage, there's a potential flood situation that's been reported to the committee. There should be a drain or whatever is the right survey.
Yep, we can have a condition surface water drainage scheme to be submitted.
Sorry, Chair. Is it not also worthwhile just making a note of the fact that that the committee does not feel that it's in an isolated location and does not feel that it has an adverse impact on the visual amenity? I know they're minor matters compared with the other one.
Yeah, we'll include those as reasons for approval. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Perhaps you could look at the screening. I'm sure the applicant's quite happy to do these things. A golf ball protection and avoidance device mounted at all times. Right. We're now just going to have a paper on latest state of the nation on appeals. If I can detain you for another 5-10 minutes. The first one on the paper before officers presented is the Marnell Park, but we have already, remind members, we have already had that reported to us and had it discussed, so I hope we're not going to go into that in too much detail, but I'll hand over to the officer to present that report, please. If the rest of the officers are withdrawing, thank you very much for your support this evening.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, I think the Marnell Park decision we actually discussed quite quickly after it came out, so I wasn't proposing to revisit that, and it's been subject to discussion in other debates as well. With regards to the other appeal decisions in Appendix B, I wasn't going to look at any specifically unless any members have any that they wish to discuss. The one point I would make is that there's been a lot of appeals, as you can see by the list. We are still winning more, if you like, than we're losing, but with the changing position in terms of interpretation of the MPPF and what seems to be a sort of a slightly more pro-development approach from the Planning Inspectorate, we are sort of constantly reviewing, if you like, the outcomes of these appeals and seeing if there's any new trends which are coming through as part of those decisions. But Chair, I wasn't intending to look at any in detail.
Just to note that 2 committee decisions were reversed to appeal, in case anybody hadn't noticed. Not talking about Marnell Park. Any questions or comments on the appeals report? Mike?
It's just this Woodland Road one, which happens to be in my ward. I can definitely say that fence stands out like a sore thumb. You know, I don't care what the inspector said.
Yeah, sure, that's what we're here for.
It's quite recently that we visited Barn Lane in Oakley, do you remember? And there was a gentleman next door to a proposed virtual rebuild of a chalet bungalow that was going to stretch right back and overshadow his garden. And we refused it on the grounds that it was just too big for the plot and too intrusive on the streets. I have to say I'm absolutely amazed that the appeal has been allowed. I don't understand it. I just have to say it's an appalling decision, and I really, really do. Of all of them, I think that one I can't believe. Thank you.
I think these things tend to support Mike's comment that the national movement is to allow appeals. I mean, not allow all appeals. There are refusals, but to side with the applicant. And in fact, the Recorder's guidance is the Englishman's home is his castle, and I think that's now statutory national guidance. Well, it seems to be reading that way. Okay, well, thank you to the officers and thank you all for your patience and a safe journey home, and I wish you a very, very, very happy Christmas and a blessed and prosperous New Year.